The game Etherworld dropped 10 years ago, marketed as a dating simulator, but in truth, it became a battleground dominated by male players chasing not love, but power. It let players embody any kind of character they wanted, from simple but deadly efficient builds to complex weaklings that demanded mastery. Among them existed one truly worthless avatar, infamous for his brutal difficulty and his face so cursed it could make even NPCs flinch. And yet, there was one lunatic who had stuck with that hideous character for an entire decade. Our protagonist, Henry Wilson. One ordinary day, the forums exploded with rumors. The Dark Dragon had appeared, and player data was mysteriously vanishing. A final boss in a dating sim. Absurd. Henry had always thought the story ended once you won someone's heart. A top-ranked player posted that this boss couldn't be beaten, boasting near-total magic resistance and countless buffs. The idea of a creature in a magical world that nullified magic itself felt like a cosmic joke. After reading about players being wiped, Henry logged in, and instantly, the dark demonic dragon materialized before him. Here's the lore. In Etherworld, a cult known as the Dark Demonic Order thrived in the shadows. Their mission? To open the gates of identity and seize dominion over all realms. And when their ritual finally succeeded, the dark demonic dragon emerged to burn the world clean. 90% of the continent had already fallen under the gate's control. Henry, who only cared about PvP, had ignored the story until now. But chaos had consumed everything. There was no escape. The beast awaited, and Henry was part of this war whether he liked it or not. He decided to give it a shot, to throw himself into battle against the infernal dragon. At last, the hero could unleash the skills he'd honed over a brutal decade. As he entered the battlefield, it was time to reveal who, or rather what, his character really was. The only player in the entire game who couldn't use magic, in a world where everyone could wield it. Because of that, even veteran players avoided him. He was weaker than a basic recruit. Technically, Henry could use one spell, and one only. It was the blink spell, and he was using it like his life depended on it. Because it did. Henry Wilson's blink allowed him to teleport randomly within a range of 3 to 10 meters, a chaotic dance through space. But the direction was completely random. Miscalculate once, and he'd blink straight into death itself. The cooldown and mana cost were ridiculous, and to make things worse, the user froze for 2 seconds after casting, an eternity in battle. So most players ignored it entirely, but not Henry. He had mastered blink. He could control both direction and distance, canceling the penalty entirely. He didn't even need mana. His stat sheet didn't have one. Blink wasn't even considered a real spell, just a movement skill. But for Henry, it became an art form. He had become obsessed with this character, because every victory depended solely on his own skill. For 10 long years, he had played the only character in Etherworld who couldn't cast magic, and he'd turned him into a legend. Then came the final blow. He struck down the Dark Dragon, landing the killing hit that ended it all. He could hardly believe it. He'd actually done it. The impossible kill. Sure, he was draped in ancient relics from head to toe, but his character was still considered garbage. Still, it felt damn good. He'd post about it, tell the community he'd slain the dark demonic dragon. But before he could celebrate, a flood of crimson warnings filled his screen. Because he'd reached the wrong ending, 90% of the world was destroyed. Yet Henry was closer than anyone to unlocking the true ending. The system instructed him to reach it, and suddenly, his body began to shift. His consciousness was being dragged into the game. When the light faded, he found himself lying on the floor of an unfamiliar building. He stood up, scanning the surroundings, confusion and adrenaline mixing in his veins. Glancing in a mirror, he froze. Staring back at him was the face of his own in-game character, Henry Wilson. Thus began Episode 1, Escape the Pursuers. It was the prologue quest, his first trial as the hero. From his pocket, he pulled out a sealed letter, an admission certificate to Stella Academy. It was unreal, but undeniable. This was Etherworld, and he was truly inside his avatar. He tried to think. That voice had commanded him to reach the true ending. But as far as Henry knew, Etherworld didn't have a true ending, only multiple branches that led to different conclusions. Then it hit him. No one in 10 years had ever achieved the true ending. Damn it. Now wasn't the time for existential crises. Henry bolted toward the window. If memory served, right after the character awoke, enemies would storm the cabin hunting him down. Too late. They were already here. Henry pressed himself behind the window frame, heart pounding. The pursuers had spotted his cabin through the dense forest, their shadows moving closer. The squad leader barked an order for his men to move out and search the area. There's only so long Henry can keep dodging them. Fighting isn't an option either. He's stuck. No clue what the next move should be. Suddenly, the system's voice echoed in his mind, giving permission to use the blink skill. Blink. The dash move Henry had drilled into his soul for a lifetime. With a body cursed by mana leak syndrome, he was a character incapable of storing even a drop of magic energy. His only shot at survival was that one skill. Back to the present, Blink's max range was 9 meters with a 3-second cooldown. Maybe the system was hinting for Henry to use Blink now. But this wasn't a game anymore. There were no mouse clicks or keyboard inputs to save him. Time was running out. His pursuers were closing in fast. Only one option remained, to risk everything and try. Henry burst out of the cabin, and a swarm of armed men stormed after him through the forest. The first stage of the tutorial: escape your pursuers using Blink. Those guys wore enchanted boots that made them faster than him. The only way to survive was to master that one skill. Henry reminded himself that he'd used Blink countless times before. The timing was carved deep into his muscle memory. The pursuers shouted for him to stop, blades flashing as they closed the gap. The fatal flaw of Blink: if you misjudge the distance, you could crash straight into a wall and die instantly. One of them raised his sword, ready to send Henry straight to hell. But the moment Henry activated Blink, everything changed. His body vanished in a shimmer, reappearing far ahead. The gap between him and his hunters widened in an instant. Their leader yelled for the squad not to give up. After all, Blink users were supposed to freeze for 2 seconds right after using it. But then they saw it. Henry was still moving. He kept his movements sharp and low, using the uneven terrain to his advantage like a pro. Players who couldn't master the Blink timing trick here would never make it past this stage. In truth, 99% of players who picked Henry Wilson never even cleared the tutorial. And that 1% who did? None of them ever mastered the distance control or continuous blink techniques. Seeing Henry blink flawlessly across the rough terrain, the leader ordered his mages to advance. They were switching tactics. Ranged magic attacks were coming. The second stage of the tutorial: dodge the incoming magic arrows with Blink. In the game, you could see everything from the third-person view. Easy enough. But here, Henry had to rely purely on instinct. That's when his other passive skills kicked in: Mana Leak Instinct, Sixth Sense, Cognitive Acceleration. Using them in sync, he dodged every single arrow by a hair's breadth. Then, with perfect timing, he dashed forward again, narrowly slipping past a massive explosion behind him. That blast would have turned him into ash, too close for comfort. The final stage of the tutorial, crossing the canyon using Blink. The only way to make it across was through absolute precision. Once he got over, he'd run into some passing mages and finally complete the tutorial. To succeed, Henry had to cancel Blink exactly 0.1 seconds before it triggered. One mistake: instant death. The canyon had about 20 floating boulders suspended in midair, but nailing that 0.1 second window was easier said than done. Whoever designed this tutorial was clearly out of their mind. Still, it was technically doable. The real problem: the pursuers were a lot closer than he'd realized. The distance between them was barely 100 meters now. With Blink's 3-second cooldown, there was no way he could cross before they reached him. It seemed the only path left for survival was to take them all out. Even Henry thought that idea was insane. Who did he think he was, fighting when he'd never been in a real battle before? In the game, The system wouldn't even allow players to attack their pursuers. But this wasn't a game anymore. No rule existed saying he had to follow the system's script. The thought of killing didn't even faze him. And it wasn't about revenge for his in-game parents either, not this time. He just believed he could win. And now, he was ready to prove it. The pursuers finally caught up, circling around Henry like wolves closing in on prey. Their leader smirked, thinking the guy was a fool to face them alone. The target was exactly 8.7 meters away. Henry triggered Blink, his figure flickering out of sight in an instant. Less than a second later, Henry's dagger plunged deep into a pursuer's chest. He could feel the warm blood dripping down his fingers, vivid, real, heavy. But there was no guilt in his heart. After all, he killed only because he had to survive. Leaving the corpse behind, Henry bolted forward without looking back. He'd taken down one, but the next strike wouldn't be that easy. His mind raced for a plan, yet something felt off. Too quiet. Almost like they'd stopped chasing him. He soon realized why. They'd taken a shortcut, lying in wait on the other side of a boulder. Magic began to swirl around them again. Dodging this next attack would be brutal. Their fire spell burned with raw, terrifying power. But then, Henry spotted a single branch, jutting out from the rock ahead. Using Blink, he hooked onto it and narrowly avoided the inferno that erupted behind him. His pursuers thought they'd nailed him, that the arrogant rookie had finally met his end. But when they looked down into the ravine, he was gone. Henry was already behind them. One unique quirk of Blink. It preserves the user's momentum. And that's how he cut down another enemy in one swift motion. Now only two remained, both frozen in shock. They hadn't expected that kind of speed or precision from such a plain-looking beginner. Henry needed to finish this before the stragglers caught up. The pursuers muttered among themselves, surprised that this weird kid had the reflexes of a high-tier mage. Truth was, Henry's reaction time surpassed that of most pro gamers, but only in the virtual world. He couldn't dodge forever, especially at this close range. Time to end it. The remaining two sneered, thinking they'd figured him out. All this guy had was Blink and a dagger. One of them thought, as long as he guarded his face and neck, that Little Blade couldn't even scratch him. He cast an icy wave spell, convinced he had Henry trapped, eager to see the look of pain twist his face. But in a flash, Henry was already in front of him, his dagger slicing straight across the man's throat. The last pursuer scoffed, thinking Henry was just a rat who'd finally stopped running. Henry simply smiled, grateful, in his own way, for the challenge that made him sharper. The man roared in rage, drawing his sword to strike him down. Henry stepped closer, hurling a spear straight at him. Blink activated mid-charge, a head-on feint that begged for a counter. The enemy assumed Henry was baiting him, planning to strike from the side after throwing the spear. Confident, he deflected it with his sword. He turned to attack immediately, but Henry was nowhere to be seen. From the very start, Henry had planned a frontal assault. The first episode came to its end. The system rewarded him for completing a unique storyline route, a bonus achievement. Now he understood completely. This wasn't a dream. His first blink, his first battle, his first kill. All of it was real. He had taken a life to survive. Henry stood up, ready to leave, but turned back toward the fallen bodies. It left a bitter taste, but he had to be practical. The hero was broke. Searching their pockets, he found around 2 million credits, roughly 2 million won. Not bad for loot. Now came a new problem, crossing the canyon. Then, from across the chasm, he heard a voice calling out, asking if anyone was there. It sounded like the group of mages from the tutorial sequence. Henry shouted back to get their attention. The mages asked if he could cross, since there was no bridge nearby. Henry replied that he was on his way, so they decided to wait. But to make that jump, one usually had to be at least a third-class knight. Yet before they knew it, they saw Henry gracefully leaping from one floating rock to another. The sight was unreal. Most assumed it was some kind of high-tier jump magic, but the blue-haired girl among them shook her head confidently. It was Blink. Still, how could anyone control direction and distance like that? Behind Henry, on the opposite side of the cliff, stood two figures. The mages thought they were his allies. Their assumptions shattered when those two suddenly launched an attack on him. Seeing the oncoming assault, Henry used Blink again, hopping to another floating boulder midair. Those attackers were clearly working with the assassins from earlier. This was bad news. With Blink's 3-second cooldown, dodging every magical blast would be impossible. Henry needed to find the next floating rock fast, his only hope for footing and survival. Pulling that off was easier said than done. The two enemies were still blasting away like maniacs, their spells lighting up the sky. Henry's footing slipped under the chaos, his balance giving out as he teetered dangerously on the edge. Every floating boulder around him hovered just out of reach. Salvation, but too far for a normal jump. He triggered Blink again, gambling on pure instinct, praying he could land on one of those drifting stones. His body slammed against cold rock. He was alive. But a searing wall of flame roared toward him. No room to dodge, no miracle left. Then, out of nowhere, a surge of ice and lightning collided with the fire, freezing it midair and scattering sparks into crystal dust. Henry's eyes widened. It was an ice spear, wreathed in electric arcs. Someone had fused two elemental attributes in a single spell, in a tutorial no less. The spell's trajectory was flawless, no wasted mana, no excess movement. It was surgical precision at god-tier level. The caster stood in the distance, that same blue-haired girl, the one who had calmly read the battlefield from the start. The pursuers, shaken to their cores, dropped their weapons and bolted in blind panic. Henry let out a shaky breath. For the first time in hours, survival didn't feel impossible. He finally climbed over the cliff's edge and nodded in thanks to the girl who had just saved his life. She brushed him off coldly, saying she didn't do it for gratitude, that it was nothing worth mentioning. Her voice was calm, refined, the kind that lingered in the air, but talking to her felt like stepping into a snowstorm. Sure, the people around here were branded as bandits who raided nearby villages, but Henry knew the truth. Most of those crimes were orchestrated by the cult of dark demons, pulling the strings from the shadows. Thankfully, this nightmare was almost over. Once he got off this cliff and into Mage territory, those demons wouldn't be able to chase him anymore. Besides, they didn't even know who he really was. A system notification flickered before his eyes once again. Episode 2. Begin. The next stage didn't seem too tough, at least that's what he thought. But when he saw his new objective, enrolling in Stella Academy, he froze. Another round of school life at his age? Unreal. He rode in a carriage with the group of mages heading toward their next destination. Faint images flashed through his mind. A younger version of himself telling his mom he wanted to become a mage when he grew up. And she'd believed in him without hesitation. The little Henry in his memories held a worn-out magic letter, a gift from his parents, something they'd worked themselves to the bone to afford. The boy had promised himself he'd study hard and make them proud. But one day, a doctor told his mother that her son suffered from mana leakage syndrome. The young Henry couldn't even comprehend it. Now the current Henry couldn't tell if those were his memories or fragments from the game character's past. He opened his eyes, the haze lifting just as dawn broke over the horizon. Someone was about to wake him. Their caravan was nearing Lensoicha, a satellite city orbiting Arcanium. The carriage came to a halt, and everyone decided to take a break before continuing. Henry caught the blue-haired girl watching him closely from the corner of his eye. She turned away almost instantly and walked off without a word, cold as ice. But still, everything was going smoother than he'd feared. He was relieved that this world's timeline leaned more toward modern than medieval chaos. Magic thrived in the ether realm, but advanced cities had tech like trains, airships, and teleportation gates, blending fantasy with near-futurism. Right now, Henry and the mages were headed for Lensoich to board an airship to their next destination. The city lay on the road to Arcanium, the beating heart of magic, home to towering spires, knightly mage orders, and 5 legendary academies. And the mightiest of them all, the one where prodigies and nobles gathered from every corner of the world, was Stella Academy. It overflowed with geniuses, heirs, and talent beyond measure. Henry still couldn't wrap his head around how his character had managed to get accepted there. That reminded him. He hadn't even checked his own skill set yet. His mana leakage syndrome came with strange perks: enhanced strength, reflexes, and perception. His sixth sense could detect mana within a 12-meter radius, and his detection acceleration would kick in whenever danger approached. Without those, he'd already be dead. The only catch: his body couldn't store mana. A congenital curse baked into his character's DNA. But it came with one upside. He could perceive every current of mana flowing around him. That meant he could sense attacks even from behind, reacting before they hit. Detection acceleration slowed his perception of time whenever something moved faster than humanly possible. A literal survival hack, essential for someone who couldn't wield mana. But using the sixth sense too long burned through his mental strength, leaving brutal after effects. Still, his base stats weren't bad. The original character had pitiful sensitivity, but it seemed that Henry's version had traded some other traits to boost that. In the Ether Realm, stats weren't all grouped under one level. Each attribute leveled separately. Skills had tiers, while attributes were measured in stars. The max cap was 9 stars, though reaching it was practically impossible. Henry had played this game for over 10 years, and had only ever hit 8 stars in stamina and perception. Now his plan was to dump points into sensitivity, to enhance his sixth sense and reaction time. Stamina and flexibility could be trained the old-fashioned way. The real issue was the mana leakage syndrome itself. If he didn't start training his body soon, he wouldn't last long. He needed to evolve it into something greater: the secrets of natural constitution. The method to strengthen the syndrome was hidden within Stella Academy, which meant one thing: Henry had no choice but to enroll if he wanted to stop the apocalypse and save himself. Phew, the hero didn't really want to leave anymore. If only he had something that could actually help him in all this madness. Henry noticed a few missed system notifications, but the clock was ticking. He'd check them later. Right now, it was go time. The airship roared to life, slicing through the clouds on its way to Arcanium, the city of magic and destiny. The squad around him noticed Henry wandering the deck, wide-eyed and lost like some clueless kid seeing the sky for the first time. The group's leader scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear, wondering why Stella Academy even bothered letting peasants board this ship. They claimed it was the world's most prestigious place, yet it was being tainted by the likes of ordinary folks. Henry just sighed, shaking his head. Kids were the same in every world: loud, entitled, and full of themselves. He walked away without a word. The arrogant guy fumed at being ignored, but his tantrum got drowned out by the sudden noise sweeping through the deck. The room went still as a girl entered. Princess Monica Biles Adalabit, royal blood of the Adalabit Kingdom. Her very presence froze the air. The boy straightened instantly, hand over heart, trying to impress royalty. She glanced at him with the icy disdain of someone who'd seen far too many insects in her life, then glided past without a word. Monica's gaze briefly met Henry's as she passed. There she was, the villainess of this world. Monica Biles, one of the main heroines of the original game, forever locked in conflict with the female protagonist. No matter the route, her fate was sealed. Death awaited her in every ending. In some endings, she was brutally murdered. In others, she was humiliated and expelled, tormented by the entire academy before fading from the world in disgrace. It almost felt like the developers had a personal grudge, determined to make her suffer no matter what. Henry had heard the rumors. She was insanely popular among male players. And honestly, he could see why. His stomach growled. Time to hunt for food, priorities first. The cafeteria shimmered with displays of beautiful, mouth-watering dishes and equally brutal price tags. Henry decided to wait until they reached Arcanium before eating. Just then, a system announcement echoed through the ship. Arrival in Arcanium in 10 minutes. All passengers, please report to the first deck. So it was finally happening. Whatever this world had in store, Henry had no choice but to face it head-on. He'd survived the tutorial, but he wasn't sure if he could really make it through Stella Academy. Or worse, survive this entire world at all. He wished there was something that could help him through this chaos. That's when he remembered the missed notifications. The system offered him a special reward: upgraded versions of his in-game items, refreshed skills, and bonus experience points. He checked if he could reclaim the returning light, or praise of the flash. But the system flagged them as too high tier, meaning their stats would be nerfed hard. As for Hyperspace Blink, it turned out to be an evolved version of Basic Blink, unavailable to him right now. Because Henry lacked something called narrative power, the system couldn't fully function. It was that hidden force that fueled a story's progression. If he kept exploring unknown storylines like yesterday, he could build it up over time. In short, he was still too early game to unlock high-tier loot. He then asked about the Buell glasses. According to system diagnostics, those were fair game. Henry accepted instantly. He never thought he'd actually see the day when he'd wear these again. The Buell glasses were a player-made item that contained all the information Henry had gathered throughout his gaming years. In the Ether realm, memory and knowledge of monsters or discoveries couldn't normally be retained. So players developed unique storage artifacts to archive their findings, and Henry had crafted his own version. The glasses recorded everything he'd ever seen. From there, he opened the Buell data folder. Inside were tabs for alchemy materials, hunting grounds, dungeons, and monsters. That was enough for now. This wasn't just a game anymore. He wasn't sure how well he could operate under this system in reality, but with the glasses, he could recover at least half of his former strength. Suddenly, murmurs spread across the deck. People were gossiping about a certain girl, Azel, the blue-haired one, daughter of the infamous traitor Dutch Mulf. The students whispered, mocking how she even dared to show her face here. Henry realized one of the glass's functions allowed him to register and analyze character data within the story. Azel Mulf, the false heroine, wielder of lightning-infused ice magic, eldest daughter of House Mulf. Her father's death had destroyed their name, and she was doomed to die as well. To explain Azel's story, Henry had to clarify one thing. This world, the Ether Realm, was based on a fantasy novel called Never Love the Princess. The original novel followed Azel as the main heroine, the tragic girl who lost her entire family. She grew up battling the schemes of the villainous Monica Biles and eventually found herself protected by the male protagonist. Her thirst for revenge faded, replaced by love and sacrifice. The novel ended in tragedy, and readers shredded it with criticism. But here's the twist. While the game world was inspired by that novel, its story had diverged completely. The developers added an original character named Flame, who took over as the true heroine. Flame's backstory was wild. A woman from modern Earth who loved reading Never Loved the Princess, only to get isekai'd straight into its world. And so, unlike the novel, Azel became the false heroine, while Flame became the real one. No matter how many players tried to change her fate, Azel never survived a single route, not once. And so, Azel got dethroned from her rightful spot as the true heroine. Not that Henry had anything to do with that chaos. Still, something about that girl felt oddly familiar, like a glitch in his memories. He shook it off, blaming it on his imagination. Time to focus. He had an academy to conquer. The courtyard of Stella Academy buzzed with energy as rows of students stood tall, listening to the professor's voice echo like divine decree. Dark demonic beings, sorcerers who had merged with forbidden forces, had long since crossed the line between human and monster. Even now, those corrupted souls continued their invasion. Every mage here was destined to stand as a wall against the encroaching abyss. A few students snickered quietly. A new semester apparently couldn't begin without the classic heroic lecture. Then came the main event, the oath ceremony. 4 top-ranking students and 1 freshman representative were chosen to take the stage. One by one, they climbed onto the platform, the air thick with envy and admiration. Their faces gleamed with confidence, shining stars who'd soon rewrite destiny itself. But among them, one presence burned brighter than all the rest. Mitch Stewart, the prodigy freshman with absurdly high scores and movie star looks. The one and only Mitch Stewart. The kind of guy who embodied the phrase, "Among heaven and earth, I alone am honored." With a mana level of 9 stars, he was already flirting with godhood. A genius born to command every element this world had to offer. Even if Henry couldn't chase the game's true ending, he knew one thing. He had to keep this guy from turning evil, no matter what. But that depended entirely on Flame and how she played her part from here on out. Since she came from the same reality as Henry, teaming up might actually work. Unless, of course, she decided he was her enemy. Then things would go downhill fast. Information was Henry's one edge. Flame wrote fantasy romance novels. Henry wrote fantasy dating sims. But in this story, he was barely an extra, a faceless NPC running a shop in the tutorial village. Meanwhile, the heroine carried a divine blessing, the ability to purify dark demonic beings themselves. But that wasn't all. She also had the bizarre aura of poverty, draining the fortune of anyone near her, which meant hanging around her could easily wreck Henry's life. His role was clear. Stay in the background, support the heroes, and, above all, avoid getting dragged into their mess. The entrance ceremony wrapped up under roaring applause. The quest Enroll in Stella Academy was officially complete. It had been ages since Henry last felt like a student. The nostalgia hit him harder than expected. Still, it felt kinda nice. The wristwatch on his arm, his new academy badge, made it all real. With this watch, he'd get better treatment than most licensed magic warriors. Prestige had its perks. He couldn't wait to put it to use, maybe even explore a bit. But before that could happen, a stern professor marched in, ordering everyone to sit down. An exam was about to begin. No items except pens allowed. Anyone wearing glasses had to undergo a special inspection. Weird. An exam right after the ceremony? Stella's curriculum was infamous, tougher than most Korean universities. Day 1, and already an exam. This was the class placement test, the gatekeeper to their future ranks. The professor barked at everyone to start. Henry stared at the paper. He couldn't understand a single line. This test made the entrance exam look like a joke. Students would be placed from Class F all the way to S rank, the elite tier reserved for top-tier characters, obviously. Henry figured, hey, he'd already been accepted. Maybe he could just hand in a blank page and chill. Being the last of 141 accepted students basically screamed Class F anyway. His eyes drifted toward Mitch again, the living embodiment of perfection. That guy was already done with the test. No wonder he looked so bored with life. Mitch's whole personality was boredom itself. Born into the strongest family, armed with unmatched talent, everything came too easy. Depending on how the main heroine handled things, Mitch could swing either way, savior or villain. And the dark demonic forces? They were obsessed with him. Of course, his cursed family ties didn't help either. Watching the geniuses work, Henry couldn't help comparing himself again. Maybe it was time to use the bulbul glasses. He'd used them countless times in the game to grind new skills, usually by studying in libraries. He had nothing to lose now, might as well give it a shot. But before he could activate them, the professor's sharp voice cut through the room, asking about those same glasses. The rule was clear. Anyone wearing glasses had to get them checked first. The professor took Henry's pair and examined them. Henry's heart raced. If any trace of magic was detected, he could be expelled on the spot. Suddenly, the system popped up, warning him that a missing component had been found. It asked him to name it. Henry silently begged it to stay quiet. After a tense moment, the professor sensed no mana from the lenses and handed them back, reminding him to report next time. Henry sighed in relief. If the glass's real functions had activated, that would have been a disaster. Now, time to cheat like a pro. Sliding them on, he saw the answers light up before his eyes. If this worked, he might actually top the charts. Forget Class F. Henry might just score himself an A-tier start. Barely a few minutes had passed when the professor suddenly announced the end of the exam and ordered everyone to turn in their papers. Henry froze in disbelief. He had only managed to answer 3 questions. The teacher began flipping through the tests, his brows twitching with something that looked like surprise. Henry had hoped he'd escape the dreaded Class F, but maybe that was too much to ask for a background character like him. Then, out of nowhere, the professor's voice thundered across the room, demanding Henry hand over his glasses immediately. The man inspected them again, muttering that this couldn't be possible. He barked at one of the students to fetch Dr. Gryan. Henry blinked, confused. What had suddenly gotten into the professor? He'd even written out the full solution process, just to avoid being mistaken for a cheater. Soon, Dr. Gryan, the Academy's top professor of magical engineering, arrived and began his inspection. The fact that Henry had solved that particular question definitely raised eyebrows. But after a deep scan, Gryan calmly declared that no cheating had occurred. There was 0 mana flow in Henry's glasses or any of his possessions. The doctor concluded that Henry had genuinely solved the question on his own power. Then, with a tone of finality, he told Professor Mark Hillman to apologize and ensure this student received proper mentorship. Mr. Hillman bowed his head, admitting his mistake and apologizing to Henry in front of the class. The irony wasn't lost on Henry. He had cheated, just a little. If the glass's original features still worked, he'd be toast. Luck was his best skill stat right now. Later, in the staff room, Hillman sat hunched over piles of papers, rechecking the results. Professor Edeltiemann from the Academy's Elder Council walked in, asking if those were the freshman exams. She'd heard this year's incoming class was particularly colorful, Hillman confirmed with a weary nod. There was Monica Biles, the fiery princess from the world's most prestigious fire magic family. Jeremy Scalvin, the prodigy who outshined all his older brothers and secured his place as the heir to the Scalvin Empire. And Liam Stone, successors to the Grand Master of the Moonlight Tower, the greatest magic tower in existence. Edeltiemann noted how tough it must have been to craft exam questions with such elite students in the room. Hillman chuckled, admitting she wasn't wrong. This year's test was full of creative twists. Hillman was pleased she appreciated that. Edeltiemann mentioned that this year's placement exam introduced a new kind of challenge. The first 3 questions were designed to push beyond ordinary academic limits. The first tested adaptability, whether students would know when to skip an impossible problem. The second required solving something found in no textbook at all. The age of rote memorization and theory was over. The new era of magic demanded fast instincts and wild creativity. But the truth was, no one was meant to solve those questions. Over 1,000 of the 1,141 students had left them blank. Of the 100 who dared to try, most didn't get a single one right. Only 3 students had managed to nail all 3. Mitch Stewart, the comet-like prodigy of the century whose origins were wrapped in mystery. Flame, the commoner girl recommended directly by the headmaster. And finally, Henry Wilson, the guy with the lowest entrance score in the entire academy. Hillman was baffled. How could someone who failed almost every other section ace the hardest questions of all? Edeltiemann asked why he seemed so fixated on this one student's grades. Hillman replied that the boy's results simply didn't make sense. She disagreed, saying there had to be meaning behind it. After all, even infinite equations couldn't produce such results by accident. When Hillman asked if she thought Henry might be a hidden genius, she only smiled faintly, suggesting it might just be coincidence, and left him alone with his thoughts. Opening Henry's file, Hillman noticed something unusual. The boy had been granted special admission due to his remarkable control over blink magic. A student personally approved by the headmaster himself, one trained in the art of combat mage specialization. Soon, Hillman would find out whether it was pure coincidence or whether Henry Wilson was something else entirely. Meanwhile, word spread fast across the academy. The class assignments had been posted. Everyone was on edge, desperate to know their ranks. Henry couldn't believe he actually had to go look for his name manually. In the game, this was always just one click away. Crowds swarmed the notice board, buzzing with gossip. People whispered about Henry, the guy who'd scored 0 in applied magic. They couldn't fathom how someone like him even got into Stella Academy. Some were starting to doubt the Academy's standards altogether. Henry ignored the chatter, planning to check his result quietly and leave. But his eyes widened when his name wasn't in Class F at all. He prayed it wasn't because he'd left most of the exam blank. Then came the murmurs. Someone said there'd been a mistake in the rankings. Uzlak of House Chech-Belain was ranked 29th and assigned to Class A. Even Kyle, who'd aced the theory section, landed there. But Henry's name was higher. Confused, he pushed through the crowd for a closer look and froze. His name gleamed under Class S. It didn't feel real. Class S, the legendary rank every student dreamed of, where only the elite of the elite gathered. Unlike the other tiers that had multiple subgroups, Class S had only one, a single unit of 41 students, all monsters of talent. If Henry had truly been placed there, it had to be some kind of glitch. Any more of this, and he was going to lose his mind. It also meant he'd now constantly be brushing shoulders with the main cast. That kind of proximity could only shorten his already fragile lifespan, and to make things worse, he couldn't even switch classes. All he could do was keep a low profile and pray no one noticed him. Somehow, he'd just have to survive this madness. Professor of Fire Magic, and simultaneously Monica's mother, Melania Baker, struck her daughter for answering 3 questions wrong. Mrs. Baker shouted that even Princess Oisel from the fallen kingdom of Mulf got 2 questions right. Monica couldn't even get the questions right that were solved by mere insects, proving she was beneath them. The girl was told to think of herself as a tiny bug and try again. Mrs. Baker demanded her daughter listen. Monica couldn't allow herself to become like her mother, exiled from the kingdom and clinging to some ridiculous professor title. She couldn't be a shame to the kingdom. Her mother grabbed her and declared that she must surpass her sister. The girl nodded timidly, understanding, or so it seemed, and walked away. No, she didn't really understand. She just lived the way she was taught and solved problems the way she was taught. Problems filled with magic she hadn't learned, spells and formulas she hadn't studied. Monica wept, confused why her mother tormented her like this. Meanwhile, Class S was already preparing for their lesson. Henry thought to himself that he had messed up. Of course, he was placed in a school crammed with antisocial weirdos. His classmates whispered and wondered how he even got here. Their parents protested, asking why Henry was in this class, and Mr. Hillman simply said he had all the skills necessary to belong in Class S. Well, it seemed our hero was an outcast. On the other hand, his classmates had been grinding hard since childhood. Henry would probably be upset too if such a notorious idiot like him joined their ranks. Classes shifted based on performance after every test, so it made sense. And Class S wasn't an exception. Of course, demotions were extremely rare. Now, as Henry thought about it, there would be a male student who later moved from Class A to Class C. They'd learn about it later. Still, it was pretty insane that all these game characters stood before our hero. In a few years, most students of this class would become world famous, and roughly 5 of them had the potential to betray the magical world. Mitch was one of them. It would be epic if Flame could prevent that from happening. Mr. Hillman entered the classroom and told everyone to settle down. He was sure some of the students had seen him before, but he formally introduced himself anyway. Mr. Hillman, Professor of Class S. Students whispered that he was the legendary professor. The dark demonic beings he hunted almost reached a 4-digit count. They called him a 7th-class magical warrior. In reality, he existed on a completely different plane. Mr. Hillman demanded everyone calm down. He said there were many talented students here, and one exceptionally unique one. Everyone knew this academy was where combat mages were forged. Becoming magical warriors meant 3 years of intense academic training. Mr. Hillman didn't expect all of them to follow the path perfectly, but he hoped everyone would showcase their best selves in that time. No questions arose, so the professor prepared to start the lesson. But suddenly, the frowning Monica appeared at the door. Imagine that. She, who followed the rules more than anyone, was late. Something must have happened. Henry decided to check using the bulbul glasses, but there was nothing new except that she had a cruel mother, and Monica's death was guaranteed. If Azel died because of Flame, then Monica would die too because of both Flame and Azel. You could call it the inevitable fate of a villainess. Henry wished he could save her if he could, but he wasn't in a position to help anyone else. Awkwardly, he could only keep his distance. The professor told the girl to sit, and she ended up next to the hero. She glanced at him with a tinge of sadness and sat down. Henry felt that everything had been going sideways from the start. Before starting the lesson, Mr. Hillman explained the order for the staff exchange, the wands the students would use in school. In classes S and A, the staff exchange would happen simultaneously. The ceremony of passing authority to the wands was slightly annoying, but Henry looked forward to it. Stella Academy had two major upcoming events. One was the Familiars Contract Ceremony. The other was the Wand Assignment Ceremony. Like the elite nature of Stella Academy itself, the staff exchange ceremony was just as special. Mr. Hillman gathered the students on a special field. Wands from low to mid-tier were laid out. All the students had to do was approach the wand they liked and take it. The process of switching wands after choosing was extremely complex, so they had to select carefully. In truth, it wasn't the students choosing the wands. The wands chose them. In the ether world, wands responded only to those they deemed worthy, triggering a resonance effect. Essentially, it meant you couldn't just grab a high-level wand because you wanted it. Anyway, Henry wondered which one he should pick. Back when things were simple, he would have grabbed a staff meant for an F-class mage without even thinking. But now that he's leveled up to Class S, he's gotta think this one through. The kind of weapon that suits Henry now is a wand. See, staffs are usually split into two main types, short wands and long rods. Wands are usually the choice of knights who shred through spells at lightning speed. Long staffs, though, those are the bishop's game, focused on one massive, devastating cast with a long charge-up time. The students around can't wait to see which one he'll pick. He's S-class now. Syncing with any staff should be child's play for him. Henry couldn't care less about the whispers around him. Out of nowhere, some guy steps in and greets him. Turns out the guy's name is Uslek. He looks shocked that Henry doesn't recognize him. Uslek asks what kind of staff Henry's planning to pick. Henry just shrugs, says any will do. Uslek sneers, telling him to pick something fit for a commoner and not make a scene or bother the professors. Henry sighs, telling him maybe he should try not to be the one causing trouble. Uslek freezes, totally offended, then starts throwing insults, trying to pick a fight. So annoying. Maybe it's time to check his stats. All the info says is that Uslek Chebelent is the son of Marquis Chebelen, one of Prince Jeremy's lackeys and a third-rate bully. Huh, so this is what passes for special these days? Anyway, Uslek points to a staff he's about to grab and tells Henry to watch closely. The staff's name, Edmuri Etamiri. Top tier without a doubt. Mid-high class staffs like that are usually for pro battle mages. Students normally max out with mid-low class gear, no matter how talented they are. Even seasoned pros struggle to handle mid-low class staffs, so that tells you enough. There's actually another mid-high class staff here besides Edmuri Etamiri, but it's clearly just for show. Mr. Hillman tells everyone to stand before the staff they like best. Prince Skalvin goes for a mid-class staff. Princess Monica picks one too, Suaviter Lahaven. It's wild to think how few students could even dream of wielding mid-class staffs. They're made for professional mages. This year's just straight-up chaos. Uslek gets twitchy, saying he can do it too. Looks like he's gonna try syncing with a mid-high class staff. He's clearly doing it for attention, wanting everyone to see what real S-class talent looks like. But the moment his hand touches the staff, a blinding red flash explodes across the room. And there's zero resonance. And yeah, Uslek got fried pretty bad. Someone mutters that mid-high class staffs are out of reach. Yeah, Uslek should probably quit while he's ahead. Because that staff already has a rightful owner, Mitch decides to give it a try. All eyes snap to him instantly. But honestly, even Mitch might not be able to handle Edmuri Etamiri. Then it happens. He grips the staff, and a wave of rainbow light bursts out. Full resonance. Unreal. A new student just synced with a mid-high class staff. Henry only thinks, yeah, that tracks. Now everyone will see just how gifted Mitch really is. Mitch catches Henry's stare and throws a wink his way. Weird. Kind of unsettling, too. Meanwhile, Flame's eyeing another mid-high class staff, Taravon. But here's where things could branch. If she claims Taravon, Mitch will probably get curious, impressed by her talent, and that opens the right path forward. But if she goes for something else, everything could take a completely different turn. Henry knows he's got to use Flame to draw Mitch to their side. She spots Taravon and walks toward it. Everything depends on what she does next. Henry silently hopes she grabs it. That way Mitch's interest will lock on her, boosting their odds of a happy ending. But to his shock, Flame walks right past Taravon, like it doesn't even exist. Henry's stunned. Maybe she doesn't know what that staff is. Maybe she's missing some crucial info. Either way, this is bad. Flame's supposed to resonate with any staff. She's the main heroine after all. What if she picks some random weak staff instead? That could ruin everything. Whole paths might vanish. At this point, Henry's got no choice but to push Taravon her way himself. With a flicker of light, he blinks right beside her in an instant. Flame jumps, startled by how fast he appeared. Henry says he's just curious which staff she's gonna pick. She gives him a wary look. He insists he only wants to help. She looked a little lost. She snaps that it's none of his business and turns away. Something's definitely off. Flame's supposed to be friendly and easygoing. That's her whole thing. But now she's acting cold. Still, Henry can't back off. His life literally depends on this. He stops her again and offers to help her choose. Flame repeats that he should mind his own business. Henry told her that there was a staff here that was a perfect match for her. Flame got pissed, demanding what he could possibly know about staffs. Her reaction was off, almost weird. Maybe Henry messed something up, or maybe she just didn't care about his help at all. The guy tried to smooth things out, saying he'd heard plenty about her and believed she could totally handle the Taravon. Suddenly there was a strange noise, like magic sparking through the air. Henry froze as his eyes locked on the staff now glowing in his own hand. Rage hit him like a wave. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Flame was the one meant to take it. He turned toward her, hesitant like a kid caught stealing candy. Flame's expression darkened, her voice low and sharp as she demanded why. Yeah, Henry was screwed. After the ceremony, students went their separate ways, but the whole academy was buzzing. Everyone was talking about how 2 first-years had managed to create resonance with mid-high class staffs. In history, only 5 people had ever pulled that off. Now the count had gone up. The weird part was, one of those students had only ever used blink magic during the manifestation exam, a spell most people called total trash tier. So this was just bizarre. Flame finally found a quiet spot in the self-study hall, away from all the chatter. Today, no matter where she went, everyone kept talking about the staff ceremony. Word spread fast that 2 newbies had bonded with mid-high class staffs, but she couldn't wrap her head around it. Who the hell was this Henry guy who grabbed Taravon? She had read the original novel 3 times before ending up in this world, but there was never any Henry Wilson mentioned anywhere. And according to the story, no one was ever supposed to touch Taravon. It looked like Henry was just trying to show off in front of her. But thinking too much about it wouldn't help, so she decided to move on. A few girls called out to her, asking if she was heading to self-study, too. Flame smiled, teasing that they must think she was some kind of nerd or bookworm. She always joked that she studied just because she had nothing better to do. One of the girls asked why Flame kept calling them kids when they were the same age. Flame laughed nervously, saying it was just a habit. Back where she came from, everyone treated her like the older one. Truth was, she knew she was living inside the novel now, so she couldn't let herself act like a child anymore. Jackie, one of the girls, asked if Flame was really going to study alone again tonight. Jackie's vibe was a lot like Flame's. though she used to be kind of sloppy before. Flame told her she wasn't alone, since there was a special extra meeting coming up. She waved goodbye and said they could hang out later. As she walked off, Flame sighed, thinking how rough it was to be a student at this age. Suddenly, she bumped into someone, a tall guy with calm eyes. It was Liam Stone, the successor to the master of the magic tower. He asked if she was okay. He noticed the troubled look on her face and guessed something was wrong. She was surprised that he actually cared and told him everything was fine. Liam then asked if she was heading for self-study. Flame nodded, mentioning that he was probably on his way to the exclusive S-Class training hall again. The guy said slacking off wasn't an option when it came to daily training. He was painfully honest, like always. He smiled, gave her a friendly pat on the shoulder, and said they'd meet later before walking away. Out of nowhere, Flame caught sight of Jackie peeking at her from behind a corner, watching like a little spy. Flame waved, but Jackie bolted off instantly. Whatever, not a big deal right now. Soon, Flame arrived at the self-study hall, where a special extra meeting was being held. According to the original novel, both Azel and Monica were supposed to show up there. The upcoming clash between the main heroine and the fantasy romance villainess was gonna be something. All the big names were there, even Mitch and Azel themselves. The session was led by Kyle from Class A, who looked totally overwhelmed by the crowd. It was basically a study boost camp for students who needed to improve their scores. Considering that elite S-Class students were taking part, it was only natural that the atmosphere was intense. Mitch, basically the male lead of this whole world, seemed oddly interested in Henry. Flame watched them closely, convinced this wasn't a coincidence. Henry hadn't done much besides clearing the 3 questions of hell. She was sure he knew from the start that acing those questions was the key to getting into S-Class. And if he really planned all that, then he was dangerous. Henry, on the other hand, was just hoping someone would drag him away from Mitch's attention. The guy smiled sweetly, asking why Henry was even here since he didn't need these lessons. Henry just shrugged, saying he didn't have a special reason. They told him to come because his grades sucked. It was still unclear why Mitch was so interested in him, though. Kyle finally told everyone to cut the chatter and focus. Today, they were reviewing the entrance exam problems. Everyone in the academy already knew it. That entrance exam was pure hell. The kind of nightmare that made even prodigies sweat bullets. Those impossible puzzles had already earned their cursed title, the 3 riddles from hell. Yet somehow, Kyle had cracked one. It made 0 sense to him why losers like Henry even existed here. He'd joined this elite academy, dreaming of expanding his influence, of showing the world that nobles weren't just pampered fools. He wanted to educate them by crushing them with intellect. But then the thought hit him like lightning. This was his shot. Word was, Henry had scored the absolute lowest on the entire exam, so Kyle would make sure everyone knew who stood at the top. First step, he'd show them all how a real mind solved that cursed problem. He swaggered up to the board, explaining that the problem was a trick, a deliberate trap to mislead anyone reckless enough to trust their instincts. As he spoke, his chalk danced across the board in confident strokes. Meanwhile, Mitch, wearing that ever-curious grin, turned to Henry and asked for his opinion, whether Kyle was right. Henry blinked in confusion. What was this guy even trying to pull? He barely understood the setup, much less Mitch's intent. And those 3 riddles from hell? Henry decided to just be honest. He admitted he had no idea if Kyle was right or wrong, but the class erupted instantly, twisting his words into something else entirely. That Henry thought Kyle's answer was wrong. Dozens of eyes turned toward him, a low murmur spreading across the room, until the instructor's voice sliced through the noise. Kyle, clearly ticked off, sneered and challenged Henry to come down and solve it himself if he was so confident. Panic crashed over Henry like cold water. Mitch, however, looked oddly satisfied, as if this was exactly what he'd wanted to happen. Fine. He'd just get it over with. Henry took a deep breath and walked to the board. He slid on his bilbo glasses glanced at the problem, and nearly laughed. These so-called riddles from hell weren't really academic at all, more like trick questions from a pun-loving demon. Example, a mage chants, "Oh dear earth, shed your tears," and suddenly the ground doubles in mud. Why? The answer? Simple. If the dirt is crying, it's composting. That's just the natural process. It sounded ridiculous, but that was the entire point of the riddle. Kyle, however, had treated it like a pure math problem, babbling something about the soil splitting apart when it weeps or whatever. His method was nonsense, yet by some cosmic stroke of luck, he'd stumbled onto the right answer. But if faced with another similar question, he'd have bombed it completely. Henry admitted he couldn't fully show how the problem should be solved, but he could at least point out where Kyle went off the rails. The riddle mentioned Earth, so Henry asked, what if it had been water or wind instead? Kyle snapped back that he'd just use a different method. Exactly, Henry said, meaning his whole reasoning fell apart the moment the variables changed. Luck, not logic, had saved Kyle. It wasn't what the test creators had intended. Kyle's pride flared for a second, but then he bowed his head, defeated. Henry's calm words had struck deep. The guy's confidence cracked like thin glass. Henry started to explain how the riddle was meant to be solved, and Flame, watching from the back, couldn't believe the other students were actually taking notes. Even Azel and Monica, who were supposed to be bickering by this point in the story, were totally drawn in. The situation was spinning off the rails of how things were meant to unfold. After the class, Mitch flashed a friendly smile and said they'd meet again tomorrow. Henry wanted nothing to do with him. Not tomorrow, not ever. He wished he could erase Mitch from his entire timeline. It probably had to do with Terravon. Even though Henry couldn't use it now, it had still drawn Mitch's attention like a beacon. No one understood why the staff had chosen Henry of all people. Other than Flame, no one else in the academy had ever wielded it. As Henry walked down the hall, he noticed Monica standing near the exit. She looked like she was waiting for someone. Clearly, it had nothing to do with him, or so he hoped. He tried to sneak past quietly, but then her voice rang out, calling to him. She said she had a question. Wait, Monica Biles, the Academy's golden princess, wanted to ask him something? She wanted to know why he hadn't explained his solution earlier. It wasn't that he didn't want to. He literally couldn't. How do you logically explain a joke disguised as a test question? Maybe she'd misunderstood. He told her there wasn't really anything to explain, but she assumed he just didn't want to show off in public, which of course wasn't it at all. Then Monica said she'd pay him, a fair reward. Whatever he'd figured out, she wanted him to explain it to her directly. And just like that, they ended up in the library. Henry still couldn't figure out why she'd pay just to hear his thoughts on those absurd hell questions. She said she had her reasons, and asked him to just tell her everything he knew. But really, she'd only messed up those 3 questions. Wasn't it embarrassing to ask for help from the guy who'd failed nearly everything else? Monica just smiled, saying she didn't care. The only thing that bothered her was not knowing the answers. If finding the truth was the goal, she'd do whatever it took. The girl was clearly a model student to her core. Henry asked why she'd come to him of all people. A princess like her had 1,000 friends who could have helped. She replied that out of all 141 freshmen, only 3 people, including Henry, had managed to answer the 3 riddles from hell correctly. Those trick questions were designed to be unsolvable, and yet somehow 3 people, Mitch, Flame, and our unlikely hero, managed to pull it off. That alone left Monica in a tough spot she hadn't anticipated. Henry was floored when he learned those questions weren't supposed to have answers. They were meant to be traps. Monica looked genuinely surprised that he hadn't realized it while solving them. Only now did he understand why he'd been placed in Class S, and why Flame had been watching him so closely. Henry didn't know the deeper structure of this world, the invisible rules holding everything together. He hadn't even known trick questions existed in this world's logic. But Flame was different. She'd read the entire novel, the original source material. Even if she didn't know every game event, she understood the plot's framework better than anyone. Like those infamous 3-trick questions, for example. But once a wild card, a being not written into the original story, entered the game, Flame had no choice but to accept the existence of Henry Wilson, which meant there had to be a reason for how she'd been acting toward him. Henry reminded Monica of their deal. In exchange for his help solving that riddle, she'd have to grant one request. His wish was simple: to turn Taravon into a magic sword. The royal blacksmiths of her kingdom could forge such a thing easily. Monica, however, knew that only low-tier mercenaries used weapons like that. Henry was a mage, after all. He just said it suited his style. There was no way he was going to explain to her that he was crippled. Either way, he asked if she was going to help or not. Monica sighed, then said it wouldn't be a problem. That kind of thing should be child's play for her. In return, Henry promised to show her how that question was really meant to be solved. The key, he said, lay in changing perspective. Monica's biggest weakness was her rigidity. Her spells followed the textbook too perfectly. She was stuck inside the walls of her own discipline. She wouldn't realize that until her second year, after suffering a crushing defeat at Flame's hands. Henry didn't think he could teach her anything groundbreaking right now, but maybe he could nudge her in the right direction. So he asked if she knew what a nonsense quiz was. Monica said she thought she'd heard of it before. Henry gave her an example. "What's between knee and knee?" She thought for a bit, then replied, "The back of the knee." But the answer was "and." What's between knee and knee? Monica's glare could have melted steel. Henry told her to chill and look back at the test question. There were formulas and techniques she'd never seen before. That meant she had to rely on something beyond knowledge, her own creativity. But creativity can't be memorized. Sure, knowing lots of spells and techniques mattered, but what truly defines a mage is the ability to look beyond one's own thoughts, to see the world through infinite lenses. Even the smallest shift could spark evolution in magic itself. Monica simply saw things for what they appeared to be. But spells weren't just meant to be memorized and recited. Henry admitted she probably surpassed him in logic and analysis. But what she lacked was the essence of all true sorcery: creative vision. Judging by her expression, she was taking every word way too seriously. Henry asked if she understood what he had just said, even though it sounded pretty abstract. Monica nodded, saying she understood perfectly, which was ironic, because Henry himself had no clue what he was talking about. So they decided to jump right into practice. Henry posed another riddle. What does a person say to a horse when putting it to bed? Monica thought hard, but nothing came to mind. The answer was, "Time to hit the hay." Next, Henry asked what happened when rock, paper, and scissors entered a race. Once again, she couldn't answer. Henry said that the rock started rolling while the paper and scissors stayed still, because of course, they couldn't move. Monica looked ready to explode, her patience nearly gone. Henry smirked and asked another one. What did the cloud say to the ocean during the rain? Monica furrowed her brow and finally replied, "I'm feeling a little emotional." Henry froze, shocked. That was actually correct. For the first time, he saw Monica smile, both in the game world and in reality. Just as expected of a princess, her creativity was on another level. She told him to stop fooling around and move to the next question. By the time they finished, evening had fallen, and the academy's halls were alive with other students wrapped in their own tasks. In the end, Henry had spent 3 full hours tossing ridiculous riddles back and forth with Monica. He hadn't expected her to take any of it seriously, let alone believe him. Monica was no doubt a sharp and talented mage, but her greatest flaw was her inflexible mindset. That flaw could be exploited, and even though she was destined to be a villain, Henry couldn't help feeling guilty. He needed to reforge Taravon into a magic sword, fast. What was done, and now there was no turning back. Without wasting a heartbeat, he made up his mind to grab the books he needed for his studies. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just pure focus. After a short dive through his memories, Henry finally stumbled upon that place. The hidden gem buried deep within his past. As he pushed open the creaking door, a wave of dust and the faint scent of old parchment welcomed him. The shop looked worn out, almost forgotten by time itself. But Henry knew the truth. The owner of this shabby bookstore had a twisted little habit, pretending to sleep while secretly watching his customers. Hidden within this nameless relic of a store were the legendary study notes of Maella, written by a prodigy who graduated from the academy 10 years ago. In the game, all you needed to start a lesson was a single tap on the screen. But in real life, you needed the actual textbook, and depending on the book's quality, your learning speed could skyrocket or crawl like a snail. At first, Henry used to buy textbooks from well-known stores, but eventually he learned the real treasures were stashed away in unmarked shops, hidden from casual buyers. If he studied magical engineering using Maella's notes, his grades were practically guaranteed. The stuff of straight-A legends. Sure, Bulbul's points could earn him decent marks, but to uncover the hidden formula of success, only the right literature could light the path. And Henry had just found it. He reached for the book, only for his hand to brush against someone else's. It was a girl, Isel. She seemed surprised that Henry knew her, though that shouldn't be shocking. After all, she was kind of famous. Isel remembered him vaguely. The guy from the supplementary class, the one named Henry. It seemed she didn't recall meeting him before entering the academy. She mentioned liking his arguments during the debate, though she was a little disappointed he never got to finish explaining his point. Then again, she hadn't figured it out herself either. Taking the book in her hands, she gave a polite nod and walked off. Fortunately, she didn't grab the book Henry needed. Still, he couldn't help but wonder, what was she even doing here? At another shelf, Isel picked up a book but sighed and put it back down after glancing at the price tag. This store mostly sold second-hand books, a haven for broke students like Henry. Isel, coming from a fallen noble family with nothing left, probably had no other choice but to come here too. Her father, most likely, was slain by the dark demonic forces that ravaged their land. It was a grim fate. A princess forced to scavenge through used books, worrying about the price, because her pockets were empty. To make it worse, in the original novel, Isel's story ended in tragedy. She died long before Flame, the protagonist of this world, even appeared. You could say Isel was the unluckiest character in the entire game's lore. Henry brought a few books to the counter, calmly asking the shopkeeper for them, but he could feel Isel's curious gaze on him as if she were trying to read his thoughts. With a soft voice, she remarked that his choice of topics seemed oddly interesting. She couldn't quite understand why anyone would bother reading about things like advanced sealing theory or ancient object-linked magic. In their modern world, where alchemy and magical engineering had already evolved beyond such things, those skills were practically forgotten relics. But Henry knew. Sometimes forgotten knowledge held the sharpest edge. Isel's eyes widened slightly, surprised he chose those books for that exact reason. Henry explained that most people thought like she did. That's exactly why it was easier to score top marks in those subjects. As Isel herself said, few wanted to attend sealing theory classes, which meant Henry could breeze through them with minimal effort and still outscore everyone else. Thanks to that, this semester would be a walk in the park for him. The next day came. Isel attended her first class, Nihilism, a subject known for easy grades. Everything seemed fine. But when she entered the classroom, her confidence shattered. The place was packed wall to wall with students. Apparently, everyone had heard the same rumor, that this subject was easy to ace. The news spread like wildfire, and now even the smartest kids had enrolled. Isel sighed and took her seat. Too late to change anything now. She'd just have to work harder in other subjects. After class, most students headed to the cafeteria for lunch. Anxiety crept up on Isel. If every class she picked turned out to be overcrowded, getting that scholarship would become nearly impossible. Her stomach growled. With only 60 meal tickets for the whole semester, she decided to settle for some cheap bread to quiet her hunger. As she walked down the corridor, she spotted Henry inside one of the classrooms. It turned out a lecture was taking place there, but the room was nearly empty. Just a handful of students, all with poor grades. At this rate, the lecture might get canceled altogether. Izel realized something. If she enrolled in this class, she could boost her grades with minimal effort. And with the extra time she'd save, she could focus on other subjects and earn more money through her scholarship. She was stunned. Henry had already figured all this out. He had built his schedule around low-competition courses to make his life easier. But that couldn't be true. Azel shook her head, dismissing it as nothing more than a wild coincidence. Professor Liddon, the master of divine lunology, stood before the class like a prophet of old, declaring that everyone already knew the origins of magic. Yet it was thanks to the Arch-Mage founder, the legendary Mage in White, that the art of sorcery spread across the world, teaching humans and every other race how to bend mana to their will. He bestowed nature's whisper upon the elves, letting them weave life from the breath of forests. To the dwarves, he granted forge magic, flames that could shape both steel and destiny. To humans, he gifted elemental magic, then ascended to the heavens, leaving behind the age of miracles. As Henry listened, his mind wandered. He couldn't tell if he'd survive 3 more years of this academic grind. Reliving school life at his age felt like torture. In the game, he could have skipped the entire lecture with a single tap. But this lecture, this one actually mattered. It might hold a clue to the true ending. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. His gaze drifted, catching Azel sitting nearby. Since when had she been part of this class? Henry didn't recall any main character from the story attending this course. Not that it really mattered to him. Professor Liddon continued, explaining how human curiosity didn't stop at elemental magic. Mages traveled the world, stealing magical secrets from other races. Yet even then, their hunger was endless. They reached their limit, unable to grasp power beyond that of the others. And when the Mage in White vanished, he left behind 12 divine moons, celestial beings bound to protect the balance of existence. The professor's tone deepened as he asked if anyone knew the legend of the 12 divine moons. Izel raised her voice, explaining that the moons were guardians who once maintained equilibrium across the continent. They scattered 1,000 years ago, their duties fading into myth. The professor nodded. Each moon wielded a sacred power, forces that once protected the entire realm. For example, the moon of Crimson Summer, the 6th moon, burned with an eternal red flame said never to extinguish. Deep in the abyssal sea of Alamancha, that same flame was rumored to still flicker beneath the waves. Students were told that the brave could go see it for themselves. Henry nearly scoffed. A joke, surely. Any living being setting foot in the domain of the Sea King of Alamancha would be reduced to nothing in seconds. Then Liddon conjured an image, the Levion shore, a massive frozen whirlpool in the center of the ocean, sealed forever by the 12th moon of Blue Winter. Each of the divine moons had unique powers, but legend whispered that when united, they could perform a miracle that transcended gods. One curious student raised a hand, asking what that miracle was, but the professor could only shake his head. No one truly knew. The moons had been asleep for a millennium. Henry silently agreed. In the game, he'd encountered several of the divine moons himself, 5 to be exact, though only during limited-time events. He'd pieced together that knowledge through countless forum discussions and player discoveries. Not a single soul had met more than he had. If his theory was right, then the 12 divine moons were somehow linked to the true ending of the game. For 10 long years, no player had reached that ending, which could only mean the key was hidden somewhere no one had yet touched. Henry had met 5 of them already, risking his life in every encounter. Now he'd have to do it all again, from zero, if he wanted to uncover the truth behind the ending. Meanwhile, outside in the academy courtyard, Mrs. Baker's fire class was in full swing. She preached that sheer strength wasn't everything. No matter how powerful your attack, if you couldn't land it, it meant nothing. Students began practicing on training dummies, their fiery spells lighting up the field. The professor's sharp eyes locked onto one particular explosion. A massive burst of flame erupted across the yard, but the target dummy stood untouched, its surface unscathed. Mrs. Baker's tone turned cold as she called out Monica. Her performance had been abysmal. After class, Monica could barely hold back her frustration. Once again, she'd embarrassed herself in front of her mother, the one person she wanted to impress most. Another student approached her, concern flickering in her eyes. The girl sat beside her, praising the princess as if she were still a radiant idol. Monica's magic was undeniably powerful. The same spell the girl used, but magnified several times over. Yet it gave her no comfort. She couldn't even aim properly. The girl insisted that Monica's raw power was awe-inspiring. To her, it was nothing short of amazing. She admitted she'd heard of Princess Bile since childhood, the prodigy of fire herself. Her name was Arshuan, and it rang a faint bell in Monica's memory. A new generation fire mage, hailed as a genius even among the elite. Monica had once thought that compared to her own lineage, Arshuan's magic would be nothing. She assumed the girl was just proud of her precise control, but Arshuan said that if Monica truly trained, she'd surpass her easily, leaving even her accuracy in the dust. Monica asked her to stop, but deep down, those words brought her an unfamiliar warmth. The princess thanked her quietly and took her leave, letting Arshuan remain under the burning afternoon light. Outside the training hall, her personal bodyguard, Mandy, awaited her arrival. A cup of her favorite tea and ginseng candies were already prepared, the small comforts of royalty. Mandy brought up the reforging of the staff Monica had asked about earlier. It was a fine staff, they said, one worthy of being remade into a top-tier magic sword. Yet something about it was off. Mandy had heard whispers that the staff constantly drained its wielder's mana. Monica froze. That was a trait of a dark, demonic artifact. But Mandy corrected her. It wasn't exactly demonic. Rather, it resonated perpetually with the natural flow of mana itself. The staff didn't just absorb mana. It sang with it, pulling energy straight from the wielder and resonating with the raw pulse of nature itself. Monica couldn't wrap her head around how such a trash-tier staff could be labeled as mid-high class. But Mandy dropped the truth bomb. That's exactly why it was only mid-tier. The original version of that relic could supercharge the user's mana to terrifying levels, ranking them among the elites. But since it constantly drained mana just by being held, the item got demoted. Its hunger for energy made it a cursed blessing. Monica was floored. How could a student even wield something like that? Mandy was just as stunned, her mind spinning. The princess caught on. That staff wasn't meant for harmony. No sane mage would ever pick it up voluntarily. Unless, of course, they either had an absurd mana pool or none at all. Monica said Henry would figure it out. Once again, the princess realized it. This guy wasn't normal. Henry was built different. A few days later, after the semester officially began, Henry sat through another mind-numbing lecture, this time on mana orbitology. Starting today, students would train their mana flow with an emphasis on aim and projection. Carlame tossed them a new orbital formula to crack. From 760 meters north, Cheol-su is moving south at 12.6 meters per second. So what's the required orbit and projected strike distance Yanhee would need to hit him using water-type magic? The class groaned. If you didn't have a water affinity, that problem was a death sentence. The professor was clearly trolling. Henry was dying of boredom. He couldn't believe this was harder than his old-world math classes. The professor caught him yawning and called him up front. Time to prove himself or crash and burn. With a sigh, Henry activated his bilbil glasses and got to work. Minutes later, the problem was dusted. Carlime froze. The kid had just casually solved a riddle-tier formula. Even he didn't know the Rita-Hibor equation could be simplified like that. He assumed Henry's mana type was water. But nope, wrong again. Finally, the bell rang. Students scattered to their next classes, grateful for the escape. Just then, Izel called out to Henry, She had a question. Watching him closely, she realized something. Grades aside, this guy's intellect could rival top-tier prodigies. That problem he solved? Straight-up university or even professor level. Stella Academy was supposed to be for geniuses. So what kind of monster was Henry, really? At first, Azel thought it was impossible. But now she was sure. This man had some secret enrollment strategy. If that was true, she had to know. So she asked which class he planned to take next. Henry was blindsided. What kind of question was that? Did she actually like him? Izel's face twisted in disgust. Gross! Henry shot back, saying that made him feel even worse. God, this was awkward. He was a grown man mentally, and this girl was driving him nuts. Still, he asked why she was prying. She explained she'd checked out his schedule. Every class he'd chosen was one where it was easy to score high. Straightforward, she asked where he'd learned such a strategy. She needed that info. Badly. Henry shrugged. No secret, just luck. If that was all, he was out. But Izel hurried after him, insisting he wait. He sighed, asking why she was tailing him. Maybe she should find someone else to copy from. There were plenty of smart kids here. Or just follow what he did. After all, she'd already been investigating him. But she pointed out that everyone who took Divine Moon Studies got an automatic A+, so it didn't matter if she joined too. Still, if she registered for all the same courses, it might drag his grades down. He knew she'd lose more than anyone if she missed the scholarship. But even so, she worried about others before herself. Annoying as she was, there was no denying it. Izel still had that main heroine energy. She asked him to recommend one easy class where she could snag a good grade. Did she really think her looks were enough persuasion? She found it ironic. Whenever she looked in the mirror, her reflection did relieve her stress. She joked about it, though. Knowing Henry's stubborn streak, she'd already prepared a little compensation. Why did these kids always try to bargain? Then she hit him with it. Did he know anything about the legend of Ghost Tower No. 7? Henry's eyes narrowed. Of course he did. Izel was shocked. Not many knew that name. She explained it was an abandoned building that had mysteriously vanished from existence. Layers of magical barriers surrounded the area now, blocking anyone from even getting close. Henry suddenly stopped walking. His mind was racing. This was massive. If Flame ever learned this, it could massively boost her attachment to the male lead. That meant Izel should have only revealed this to him in the original storyline. But here she was, spilling secrets to him. That wasn't supposed to happen. So Henry brushed it off, saying it was just a dumb, spooky story he didn't care to hear. But Izel chased after him again. He finally sighed. Fine, he'd tell her for free. She blinked in surprise. He'd acted like he didn't want to share anything? And now he was the one offering? This guy made zero sense. The hero brushed it off with calm composure, saying that sometimes things just fall into place. What mattered was that Izel genuinely wanted to share something with him. It wasn't about grades. This was something deeper, something that could actually help her grow. Henry advised her to take Abyssal Journey Meditation as one of her humanities electives. To pick something like that for a humanities credit, Divine Moon Studies mixed with deep meditation, was wild. Azel briefly wondered if Henry was cultivating like some ancient master. But no, not quite. He decided to explain. His old mentor had once held the position of bishop, just like Izel would someday. Through meditation, that teacher had vastly amplified her magical strength. Izel was stunned. Power that immense, from meditation alone, it sounded impossible. But for bishops capable of wielding large-scale destructive magic, meditation wasn't optional. It was everything. The precise casting of spells might stem from formulas and equations, but ultimately, it all originated from the mind. The consciousness that moves mana itself. Normally, Henry wouldn't share something so personal. But Azel was an exception. Maybe because she was cute, even if he had once called her ugly. She smiled softly, thanking him. Though the class wouldn't boost her grades, she promised to enroll anyway. Watching her run off cheerfully, Henry felt a strange chill. He had actually told her, and the thought of how this could change the future made him uneasy. But fear wasn't an excuse to run. If he ignored her now, Azel would meet a tragic end in this life, just like before. Maybe, just maybe, meditation could save her. Only then did Henry realize something. He was a mage, too. And he hadn't trained properly at all. In the game, his character had rigorously trained his body, awakening his magical reinforcement and pushing himself far beyond human limits. In the game, experience came with a single button press. But here, in reality, he could live it, feel it. Lately, things had been quiet. No monster hunts, no story events, nothing to gain experience from. Honestly, he owed Azel for reminding him of that. Later, he returned to his dorm. The building was huge. Stella Academy housed all its students here. In the game, dorm customization was meant to be bonus content, a fun side feature. But for Henry, this dorm was all he had left. His village was ashes. The dorms were divided by class ranks. The rooms were identical in size, but the number of occupants varied depending on the class tier. Naturally, Class S got the top floors. Henry felt a pang of loneliness, but he finally had a space that was truly his. He sat cross-legged and began to meditate. Stats weren't everything. This was real life now. He needed to sync his mind and body, not just his mana. In the game, his character was a prodigy who could manifest sword aura by circulating infinite mana within and beyond his body. No one had paid attention back then, so no one realized Henry had been a true sword genius, the only one to ever reach the absolute peak. Now, he would have to walk that same path again. His breathing dictated the flow of mana throughout his body. If he could steadily increase the mana intake with each breath, eventually he would draw in massive amounts effortlessly. Skills didn't level up just from experience points. They grew through constant use, meaning all he had to do was train relentlessly. Hours passed. The first light of dawn began to seep through the window. When Henry opened his eyes, a familiar sensation washed over him. One his game avatar must have felt countless times. It was the faint but unmistakable pulse of the mana leakage syndrome, something he had once accepted as part of himself. Weak, but real. His mana leakage syndrome and flicker skills had both leveled up. One step closer to his goal. No matter what it took, he would reach the true ending. Meanwhile, Flame stood in an open field. The breeze and landscape looked crafted by magic, yet they felt hauntingly real. The Stella Dome was a pocket dimension built into the Academy grounds, a controlled space that could morph its size and environment at will. Every sports event, combat trial, dungeon raid, and monster training session happened right here. A total of 141 students gathered on the field. 50 from Class A1, 50 from Class A2, and 41 from Class S. Normally, there should have only been 39. Flame had expected 40 total, including herself, but she hadn't accounted for one extra soul. Henry Wilson. She had no idea where he came from. In the original novel, there were supposed to be 1,140 first-year students. With her inclusion, it became 1,141, which meant Henry had always existed in the original timeline. Flame decided not to rush. She'd unravel this mystery bit by bit. After all, she was the only one who knew the story from the inside. The class was about to begin. Flame overheard a few students chatting. Apparently, young Master Jeremy had finished registering for his classes. Several students had enrolled in soft magic studies just because they'd heard he'd joined too. Jeremy smiled that perfect, princely smile, telling everyone to have fun together. In the novel, he had been obsessed with Azel, only to be rejected, and by the end, he became one of the main villains. He looked kind on the surface, but every action he took was calculated. Flame knew better than to get close. Still, she couldn't deny it. He was handsome. She understood why everyone gravitated toward him. The prince's entourage was easily the flashiest group in the entire academy. Flame steadied herself. This world was her new reality, and she needed to prepare for what was coming. Instructor Hillman appeared, announcing that they'd start with a simple warm-up before today's actual lesson. He needed to assess their skill levels first. He'd be personally overseeing their training. If they didn't like it, too bad. Professors here had the power to raise or dock points at will. Everyone needed to remember one thing: fall below the point threshold, and you're expelled. Hillman then began explaining the training regimen. The students were thrown into a dungeon simulation. The professor designed it to mimic real ones. Deadly traps, lurking monsters and all. A trial meant to test every single soul who dared to enter. 4 points for slaying a first-tier monster, 8 for taking down one of the second tier. Each move carried weight, each strike a step closer to glory. 20 points were reserved for claiming a pointer. The top 5 students would earn not just rewards, but rare privileges in the Academy's sacred shop. Those who failed would have their points stripped away, their effort erased. Fear of failure lingered, yet students could team up if they lacked the courage to stand alone. But teamwork came at a cost. Every earned point would be split among the squad. Eliminating another student meant seizing all their points. With that, Mr. Hillman wished them fortune and vanished into the shadows. The ground trembled violently. Something ancient and monstrous began forcing its way through the earth. A new map materialized before them, Jack and the Beanstalk. Flame readied her staff, her eyes burning with determination. She had no time for hesitation. Jackie questioned whether she'd go solo during this field test. Forming a party could bring plenty of advantages in a dungeon like this, but for Flame, soloing meant full control and more points. She decided to face the challenge alone, relying on no one but herself. Jackie seemed to understand, though her tone dripped with sarcasm. Flame couldn't tell if it was mockery or envy. She promised that maybe next time they'd team up. As Flame walked away, she caught faint laughter behind her, Jackie and the other girls mimicking her voice. Maybe it was just that age, when arrogance masks insecurity. An hour passed, and fatigue began to claw at her limbs. She wished the cursed training would finally end. Then came the ambushes, not just monsters, but other students launching field attacks. Still, Flame held her ground. As expected of a student under Stella's tutelage, even mock dungeons demanded full vigilance. She had already racked up 18 points. Not bad. One more pointer would close the gap completely. As she moved deeper, Flame sensed something. A faint, human presence hidden within the mana flow. It wasn't a monster. It was a person. Someone capable of masking their presence at an impossible level. Still, Flame had her own tricks, merging with nature itself, erasing her aura until she became part of the world's pulse. With her mastery over binding, destruction, protection, and healing, she could ambush anyone careless enough to cross her path. As she approached, she realized the figure was Henry, the loner who always walked his own road. Many had tried to recruit him, yet he turned them all away, walking alone like some ghost of pride. Flame could never quite read what went on behind his calm, distant eyes. Then she spotted it. The pointer in his hand. The perfect opportunity had revealed itself. She decided to test him, to see what kind of fighter he truly was. 15 meters separated them, close enough for a clean strike. At that range, he'd have no time to cast a proper defense. Flame unleashed a blast of radiant energy, a light bullet screaming through the air straight toward Henry. He evaded effortlessly, using a flicker step that blurred his figure like smoke. Shock rippled through her. Dodging a second-class spell from that distance should have been impossible. Henry pulled back, widening the gap. To him, it must have looked like she had tried to take him out from nowhere. Fortunately, the leak syndrome levels were still rising. Otherwise, Henry might have been in real danger. 2 flicker steps remained in his arsenal. If he used the terrain smartly, he could eventually outmaneuver her, though it was safer to avoid direct confrontation. He shifted positions once more. The distance felt safer now. His target was the 5th place. There was no reason to gamble his shot at that. The reward for 5th place was ether roots, rare relics that enhanced both vitality and strength. The top 4 spots were already destined for the main prodigies. For Henry, 3 more pointers would secure his rank. But fate intervened. A hostile group appeared, eyes burning with aggression. Their leader was Raiden, a rising troublemaker from the school, a thug under Ooslake, Jeremy's notorious subordinate. Raiden carried 3 pointers already, impressive for someone who relied purely on brute force. The group whispered about Henry, calling him a fraud who cheated his way into Class S. Raiden sneered that even Stella's standards had dropped lately. Their words reeked of envy and dull repetition. They demanded Henry hand over his pointer, seeing him as easy prey. The young man refused, his calm resolve making Raiden grin with twisted amusement. Raiden's gang mocked the idea of him standing against them alone. They jeered that he couldn't even wield proper magic or his so-called legendary staff. Henry weighed his options in silence. With only a first-tier flicker, he couldn't win against someone from a noble bloodline like Raiden's. If only he had 3 flickers. Still, there was one edge in his favor, the pointer in his grasp, and the fact that this entire battlefield was a dungeon where anything could be twisted into a weapon. Henry raised the pointer, pretending to surrender, but in his eyes, a storm of mana was already forming. In a heartbeat, Henry materialized right behind Raiden and struck him hard, landing a clean hit that left the thug reeling. Raiden swore to track Henry down, cursing the lowborn who dared steal from him, but the ghost of the thief had already vanished into the dust. Raiden spun around only to find Henry standing at his back like a shadow, too fast, too slick, impossible to pin down. It had been a reckless move, but Henry accepted the second pointer with a quiet grin, counting the prize like a gambler who just hit a winning streak. Raiden fumed, unable to parse how the pointer had been taken, demanding its return. Henry simply refused, holding his loot tight. Those pointers were wildly effective. Henry had stumbled onto their power by accident while fooling around in a game, and the find felt like exploiting a glitch in the system. The pointer's unnatural durability kept them from shattering under student magic, which made them function like the strongest class of magical tools. While many mages used them to amplify spells, Henry, whose fights were built on raw physicality, could leverage their offensive power to the fullest. Raiden lost it, furious that someone dared nick his gear, and barked orders for his crew to swarm the thief and take back what was theirs. Just as the gang rallied, the earth convulsed again. An earthquake ripped the map open, scattering everyone and forcing Raiden to call for calm before the terrain swallowed them. Henry seized the moment and bolted, slipping through collapsing ruins with the kind of reflexes born from habit and grit. The mage's magic was stronger than expected, so Henry hadn't banked on an easy escape. But blink-step dodging was second nature, and he moved like smoke. Now the crew couldn't catch a beat on him. Years of dual practice let Henry use every crack and ledge of the dungeon like a private playground. Raiden kept yelling that they only needed one hit to pin him down, but the quake wouldn't stop, and the landscape kept shifting under their feet. He ordered the gang to wait until the ground stilled, then pounce together. If their spells misfired, they'd risk a dangerous magical ricochet. Henry struck again at an impossible moment, when the thugs were distracted and the gap opened like a throat. Spells were cast, mana flared, and then the feared ricochet happened, turning their own magic against them. Chaos swallowed the group. Disoriented and staggered, the gang collapsed into confusion as their plans unraveled. Henry walked away with a cocky smile, 3 pointers clutched in his hand like trophies plucked from a battlefield. Raiden raged and vowed that at least the last pointer would be theirs, but Henry laughed it off and bolted, already gone into the maze. The gang was left steaming with humiliation, stunned at how slickly they had been outplayed and stripped. Finding a quiet corner, Henry admitted he'd hit the jackpot, the grin of a kid who'd cracked a vault flickering across his face. Had he tried to fight them cleanly, he would have been robbed. Dungeons rewired the rules, and he'd learned to play them like an old hand. But a new prickling crawled across Henry's skin, a weird sense that something else lurked nearby. He turned and nearly took a molten blast to the chest. A massive cone of fire slammed past where he'd just stood. Luck held. He had dodged by inches, yet the near miss made his heart stutter. Someone had nearly burned him alive. The spell belonged to Monica, who arrived in the smoke like a storm goddess and sized up the scene, eyes sharp with imperial impatience. Henry tried to explain that he hadn't snatched the last pointer on purpose. Circumstances and a slippery chance had forced the play. Monica registered his excuses but stayed silent, her expression folding into cold calculation rather than anger. Henry bristled, accusing her of waiting until he fought the thugs so she could swoop in and claim all the pointers in one sweep, as if hoarding were her birthright. Monica reminded him of her royal pedigree, the unspoken power of bloodlines making her moves feel inevitable. She expected him to duel her for the spoils. Stealing the last pointer from a commoner would be beneath the princess's dignity, so she insisted on taking it the proper way, through victory in combat. They traded words about honor and prestige. Henry called out the cruelty of preying on weaklings, while Monica observed his little theater with cool amusement. She'd watched him toy with those goons from the start, never intending to actually torch them with proper magic, more like playing with insects before stepping in. Monica had been rushing earlier, desperate to snag points before her mother could scold her for lagging. Every tick mattered to a princess under pressure. Then she'd heard the screams on the stairs and followed the sound, arriving to see Raiden and his crew in disarray. For a flicker, she'd thought to jump in and take the pile of pointers, but 6 attackers across the room made that a tight call even for her. Instead, she'd waited, planning to swoop when the fight burned itself out, so she could snag everything without getting her royal hands dirty. The sight of Henry fighting without anything but blink step really shocked her. He'd been reckless, but effective, and that piqued her interest. Raiden's clique were nobodies in terms of raw talent compared to her, but they belonged to old mage families and had the arrogance of legacy behind them. If Henry could spar with those clowns using only flickers, then he had skill to reckon with, and Monica realized she'd have to scorch him to stop him for good. So she struck, full power, like a princess calling the sun down, and the onlookers watched as flames carved a path toward Henry. Dodging with only 2 blink steps wasn't sustainable. The angles closed, and Henry needed a different tactic if he wanted to survive. Monica taunted him about pulling out his staff, but he reminded everyone that she'd taken his proper rod for reforging in an earlier mishap. Still, a basic staff was issued to every recruit at induction, a simple stick gathering dust in the academy storeroom. Henry had forgotten that little tool was tucked away in his locker, something he'd never expect to actually use in a fight against a princess. He laughed, the sound sharp against the crackle of embers, while Monica fumed. The plebeian's mockery stung her pride. She didn't care about the other losers. Against Henry, she meant to unleash everything she had and leave no shred of mercy. Henry kept fighting like a man who meant what he did, just without the magic finesse. He relied on guts, timing, and 2 perfect blink steps. Monica warned him flatly that if he didn't get serious, she would end him, a royal promise that tasted like ash. Monica was dead set on crushing the plebeian this time. Flames danced across her hands, their heat twisting the air around her like a living inferno. Henry was in full panic mode. His blink step dodges were fast, but her area of effect spells blanketed the field like a blazing storm. Only his sharpened instinct saved him. He picked up the faint hum of gathering mana and bolted just before the explosion could swallow him whole. He barely escaped this time, but he knew luck was running thin. The next blast might not miss. Even getting close to Monica was a gamble. Every step into her range meant risking another wave of fire magic detonating at point blank. Henry understood that too well. He'd lost plenty of PvP matches against fire mages before. Monica wasn't just powerful, she was terrifyingly precise. In open terrain, she would have wiped him out in seconds. There wouldn't even be ashes left to sweep up. This wasn't even a real duel. It was target practice for her. Fire arrows rained down in volleys, but Henry refused to just stand there and take it. He gripped the pointers tight and charged forward through the storm. With his heightened perception slowing the world around him, he managed to deflect bolt after bolt, steel meeting flame in a blur of motion. Monika's eyes widened. She'd never imagined someone could parry fire magic with physical weapons. Bit by bit, Henry's consciousness was shifting. Fighting a mage in reality felt nothing like gaming behind a keyboard and mouse. He could feel the flow of Manhwa surging through the air. Like invisible rivers he could almost grasp with his hands. His sixth sense grew sharper, syncing with his body like a new organ, instinct as clear as sight or hearing. Monika was bewildered. The wild terrain, choked with vines and roots, should have given her elemental fire a clear advantage. If nature refused to bend, she would simply turn up the heat, amplifying her flames until the world itself surrendered. Henry knew defense wouldn't save him forever. At some point, he'd have to strike back, use those pointers to shatter Monika's magic shield. Spotting his moment, he blink-stepped through the flames, closing the distance in an instant. Monika began chanting the spell for Scorching Tempest, a brutal firestorm meant for close-range combat mages. A blast detonated around her, a shockwave pushing everything away within a 2-meter radius. Henry had felt that force before, too many times to count. Before she could reinforce her barrier, Henry's strike shattered her magical shield, cutting off her spell mid-cast and silencing the flames. Dropping to one knee, Henry declared victory, not with arrogance, but with the calm certainty of someone who'd finally turned the tables. Monika trembled, holding back frustration and tears, her voice breaking as she demanded to know who he really was. Henry simply answered that he was just another student. Nothing more, nothing less. Without looking up, he called out for Flame to stop hiding and step forward. She approached, pretending she hadn't been hiding at all, though she couldn't fathom how he'd noticed her presence. Henry lied easily, saying his instincts had picked it up. In truth, his sixth sense from mana leakage syndrome had tipped him off. Flame pressed further, asking how he knew a training pointer could break through a mage's shield. Was that instinct too? That line wasn't in any game script or magic manual, and Henry knew there was no way to explain it without sounding insane. So, with his usual dumb grin, he said the pointers were just tougher than expected. Of course, training gear had limits, but he'd bet it could still punch through her magic. Flame's tone sharpened as she asked why knights had vanished from this world. The question hit deeper than Henry expected. He had no real answer. Flame had always thought Henry was a bit off, but now he seemed truly strange, almost otherworldly. She pressed again, asking what he really was. Barely a month had passed since his arrival, and already the questions were catching up to him. Telling her the truth would be reckless. Flame was still cautious around him, and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. So Henry told her he might look suspicious, but he wasn't her enemy, and that he genuinely wanted to help her. Before she could respond or ask anything else, he said there was no time to explain, and turned to leave. He was just starting to feel relieved about getting away when a volley of pointers came flying straight at him. Turning around, he muttered that if Monika had a problem, she could have just said so instead of throwing things. Monika crossed her arms, unimpressed. She'd expected him to catch them easily, considering how he dodged everything else. But even the sixth sense had limits. Its duration depended on mental strength, and Henry's had just burned out completely. His head throbbed from the hit. When he asked why they were throwing pointers, Monika coolly explained that, having lost, she was handing over her share. Pride was a dangerous thing. If Henry took them all, his rank would skyrocket. But he didn't care about rewards or standings, so he picked up just one, saying the rest could stay with them. That act of mercy, showing grace to a defeated rival, was almost too noble for someone like him. Flame thought he was a complete idiot. Monika muttered that he clearly wasn't the brightest, just a commoner after all, but curiosity burned in her eyes about who he really was. Meanwhile, high above the dungeon, the professors watched every move unfold through their scrying screens. Telix from the Council of Elders noted how the S-Class intake this year was stacked with insane talent. It had been worth showing up. Other big shots had joined too. Board members from the Blue Tower and high-ranking Mage all eager to see the new generation's trial. Professor Hillman figured that was only natural when searching for prodigies. He was sure most instructors had their eyes glued to the feat as well. The view shifted on screen to a fierce clash between Mitch and Liam. Mitch unleashed Blink Strike, a third-tier spell, over and over, filling the arena with flashes of light and raw kinetic chaos. Every professor in the academy agreed on one thing. What they were witnessing was flat-out impossible for a 17-year-old. Normally, a mage would hit the third rank around their 30s, but Mitch was already slinging that level of magic like it was nothing at 17. Both Mitch and Liam were tearing up the battlefield, switching between 3 elemental types like it was second nature. Most mages could barely handle one element, and even then, it took them years of grinding just to unlock a second. True prodigies, the real legends, were those born with the ability to wield 3 or more elements. And both of these guys were born that way. Suddenly, the sky darkened as a massive raven descended onto the arena, its wings spreading a shadow over the crowd. Professors whispered among themselves, guessing it had to be the secret boss. But instead of attacking, the creature gently landed between Mitch and Liam, kicking up dust as the air grew tense. From its back stepped Azel Mulf, who had come to halt the duel, apologizing for the interruption. The crowd knew only someone with extraordinary abilities could even find a secret boss, let alone take it down. It wasn't just about strength. It took skill, instinct, and pure guts. Taking on one alone was practically suicide. Whispers rippled through the elders. The girl was none other than the eldest daughter of the traitor, Archduke Mulf. What a waste, they thought. Without her father's disgrace, her talent could have gone down in history. But soon, every gaze shifted toward the princess of Adalabit Kingdom. Everyone wanted to know who she was facing. The audience gasped as unfamiliar flashes of light tore through the field, a type of spell they hadn't seen in ages. It was the flicker spell. Countless mages had tried to master it, and most either ended up crippled or dead. The rest gave up, labeling it uncontrollable. Yet here was a student who commanded it effortlessly, as if the flicker wasn't a spell at all, but an extension of his own soul. Professor Hillman spoke up to the astonished elders, revealing the boy's name, Henry Wilson. A once-in-a-generation student, specialized in the art of flicker, a field so rare, most had written it off as legend. The power of Mitch, Liam, and Azel was overwhelming, but what Henry displayed was something on another level entirely. Elder Telix muttered, wondering why Henry didn't switch up his magic types. It looked like he was toying around. If he'd used his full arsenal, he could have finished the fight already. But before anyone could respond, someone entered the chamber, claiming that Henry was fighting seriously. It was Eltman Eltwin himself. The man's calm tone carried weight. Henry had been serious from the very start. To Eltman, Henry's combat style wasn't just powerful, it was nostalgic. It reminded him of the ancient code of honor once followed by knights, the kind of chivalry that had vanished alongside the age of steel and sword. Hillman immediately understood what Eltman meant. The mindset of a warrior who chose the blade even in a world ruled by magic. The code of honor was the essence of those heroes who once defended the world from darkness with nothing but steel and willpower. Legend said they faced evil head-on, sword in hand, without hesitation. And now, a modern mage was out there, fighting with a pointer like it was a sword, defying logic, yet embodying the same spirit. The fact that Eltman Eltwin himself, the principal of Stella Academy, a 9th-rank maestro, and one of the 10 great sages of the continent, took interest, said everything. The first practical exam was officially over. The battlefield shifted to the S-Class training grounds. There, Liam continued his relentless practice, striking at dummies even as his mana reserves ran dry. Still, he wasn't satisfied. He was far from where he wanted to be. Out of 1,141 students who took the exam, 39 were expelled. Azel, who had slain the mysterious bird, ranked first, and Liam took second place. Mitch ended up in 6th, but Liam didn't feel victorious in the slightest. If Azel hadn't stepped in, The fight might have ended with him flat on the ground, or worse. It had always been like this since day one. Mitch didn't care about effort, yet somehow always crushed every challenge and came out on top. Even in the practical test, Liam had mapped the entire field with magic circles, analyzed every move, and still, Mitch handled his attacks with ridiculous ease. Liam couldn't wrap his head around it. No matter how much he pushed, the gap between their talents felt impossible to close. But self-pity wasn't an option. The only path forward was more training, more sweat, more fire. As he fought to keep his focus, Monica appeared on the field, her sharp eyes catching the rare flash of anger on Liam's usually calm face. She wasn't in the best mood either, so without a word, she unleashed her magic on the training dummies, turning them to ash. Even with one of her wands broken, the princess had secured third place. Her mother seemed pleased, but Monica knew that if she hadn't, punishment would have been swift. It infuriated her that some commoner strutted around as if the world revolved around him. Watching her, Liam couldn't help but think she had her own demons to fight. Maybe it was just his imagination, but her magic felt sharper, more precise. Monica's fire magic was so wild it was nearly impossible to control. For her to advance this fast didn't seem real, or maybe Liam just didn't want to believe it. Meanwhile, the princess herself refused to admit it, but training with Henry had changed everything. Ever since she started solving those tricky riddles he threw her way, her magical control skyrocketed. Henry was just a lowborn with garbage grades and a temper to match, and yet Monica couldn't deny it. He was the only one who truly understood how to fix her weaknesses. It drove her insane. Soon, Mandy arrived, holding the reforged staff of Terravon, the one Monica had requested earlier. The assistant said she'd deliver it to Henry right away, and Monica gave a brief nod. But then, at the last second, she stopped her, asking to hand her the box instead. The princess made her way toward the second tower, having heard that Henry was somewhere inside. The second tower loomed high, filled with research labs and professors' offices. Henry was probably there meeting with some professor. That was the only thing that made sense. But as Monica stood at the entrance, she froze. Why had she even come here? She could have handed him the staff back at the training grounds. If she kept showing up like this, people would start saying the princess was chasing after a commoner. Just as she was about to turn back, her old mentor, Professor Hammerl, appeared in the corridor. The woman who once guided her through her first sparks of magic at the royal castle now looked at a student who had grown so much since those days. Hammerl asked what brought the princess to the tower. Monica quickly said she had some business, but was already leaving. The professor nodded, saying it was probably for the best. Things were getting chaotic here anyway. Several high-ranking figures in the magical world had arrived, stirring up the place over a student named Henry Wilson. Monica couldn't help but tense up at that name. Hammerl explained that she'd seen his duel herself. That strange fight, where Henry didn't even use magic. That meant her mentor had witnessed the whole embarrassing scene. Monica's cheeks burned with shame. To think that she'd lost her composure like that in front of the one teacher she respected most. The professor noticed the weight in her student's expression. She told her not to be too hard on herself. Her opponent had given everything he had. Even without using magic, there was something about him. Something rooted in his creed. After watching that duel, even the Academy's director had said he saw the revival of an ancient warrior's code of honor, long thought extinct. Monica could hardly believe anyone would call that nonsense a code. Henry pretending to bring back chivalry? Ridiculous. Yet she remembered clearly. He fought with that teaching pointer like it was a blade. Maybe that was why he'd wanted a magic sword so badly. Still, refusing to use magic at a mage academy was a suicidal handicap. He'd definitely lose points in every magic practicum, yet Hammerl said he'd chosen that road despite knowing how rough it would be. The professor found it incredible that someone who had already mastered the art of flicker still pushed himself beyond his limits. That kind of determination couldn't be fake. It had to come from something real. Later, Monica turned the thought over in her mind. In this age, anyone who dared claim to follow the ways of knights would be laughed off the continent. And yet, Henry seemed dead serious about living by that forgotten code. The idea made her furious, and for some reason, flustered. Suddenly, Henry appeared nearby, casually munching on some ether roots as if he owned the place. Startled, Monica snapped, shouting that she wasn't there because of him, though no one had accused her of that. Her face flushed red as she quickly handed over the box, telling him to take the sword. Inside was a formless blade, a raw, unfinished weapon radiating pure potential. The craftsmanship was exquisite, as expected from the Adalabit royal artisans. It was a good thing Henry had helped the princess forge it. He joked that he might keep the box, maybe even sell it later for a good price. Monica coldly allowed it, saying he could do whatever he wanted. She turned to leave but hesitated, asking if it was true that he really intended to avoid all other magic. Realizing how that sounded, she stammered, flustered again, and hurried off, pretending she hadn't asked. Earlier, Professor Hillman had said something similar about Henry's approach to magic. The man had apparently figured out Henry's intentions and respected his creed, even if it was a road filled with hardship. In the end, everything seemed to work out as it should. With that new blade, Henry would be fine in the next chapter of his journey, at least for now. It was time to test it out. He began channeling mana into the sword. The response was better than he'd hoped, clean, powerful, and steady. Still, he couldn't help but think it would have been even cooler in the hands of Flame. Flame, the main heroine of this story, was something else entirely. She could wield the magics of elves, dwarves, and even angels, despite being human. Her staff constantly devoured Manhwa, a weapon only someone with perfect control could manage. She sustained her energy by syncing with the natural world, using that staff as the final strike in her battle rhythm. Henry, on the other hand, had no innate mana pool at all. His body rejected it, a side effect of his mana leakage syndrome. No matter how much he absorbed, it always spilled back into the world, which meant his breathing itself became the mana source for Terravon, the sword. Curious, Henry opened his status window to check his stats. The reward from placing 5th in the practical exam had given him a slight power boost. Now that he had a weapon, he could grind his stats upward without burning through experience points. Sword training was next on his list. From this point on, free time was officially over. Meanwhile, in the classroom of Professor Varian, the defense magic instructor announced that starting today, they would begin practicing real, advanced-level magic. The students spread across the room, raising their staves in preparation. The class was full of elite talent, and it was a good thing Varian had divided them by skill level. Then his eyes locked on one particular student, the troublemaker from Class S, who'd been making waves all semester, a commoner who had resonated with a mid-high level staff and ranked 5th in the dungeon trials. Varian couldn't stand the sight of him. He strode forward and confronted Henry, questioning why he wasn't doing anything. Henry calmly replied that he was focusing on a different kind of defensive technique, so learning basic barrier magic wasn't worth his time. The arrogance of that answer infuriated Varian. It would have made sense if Henry possessed some ancient bloodline or hereditary spell like the Princess of Adalabit, but a lowborn like him? Impossible. He'd heard rumors that Henry couldn't use any magic except flicker. In that case, the professor decided to make a show of it, asking Henry to demonstrate his amazing defensive technique in front of the whole class. His opponent would be more so from Class B, a talented mage with solid backing. In this academy, even an ordinary defense instructor needed the right connections just to keep their position. Morso Dordan came straight out of the Scalvan Empire, the land where magic and pride are everything. For him, this duel was more than a classroom match. It was a chance to flash his skills, to prove his worth in front of everyone. Facing a student from Class S? That's the kind of showtime that could rewrite reputations. Varian threw the question Henry's way, asking if he was down for it. Henry, calm as ever, just figured, Why the hell not? The two opponents stepped onto the platform, the air crackling like a storm about to hit. Morso's crew hyped him up, shouting for him to crush Henry like some low-level bug. They wanted to see the commoner humiliated, for everyone to know their guy reigned supreme. So yeah, another lapdog from that Uslek Raiden squad. Those dudes always thought they were untouchable, blind to how small their world really was. Fine by Henry. The only reason he even showed up for these classes was because attendance was mandatory. Magic lectures were useless to a guy who couldn't cast. Professor Varian was infamous, a bad-tempered relic from the Academy's early years, feared more for his mood than his teachings. The rules were simple. One attacks, the other defends, then they switch. Varian announced it like some ancient ritual. It was time to see what Henry's training was worth. Using magic out of turn was forbidden. Morso went first, of course. The crowd whispered about Morso's earth element spells, heavy hitters no one could block. Even Jeremy, with that laid-back grin of his, watched in quiet amusement. Varian barked the order to start. The duel was on. Morso didn't hold back. He threw out a rank 2 spell, way above what was allowed in basic practice. Everyone knew the limit was rank 1, but rules never mattered to nobles who thought they owned the world. The tension spiked. Could Henry even walk away from this in one piece? Morso unleashed the piercing wrath of Dorton magic, snarling like a beast. The attack came fast, all fury and arrogance. Henry raised his blade. One clean slash, and the magic shattered. Morso froze, disbelief twisting his face. It looked like Henry had literally cut through the spell. But how could a swing of a sword erase magic itself? Varian knew better. That kind of thing shouldn't be possible. Yet Henry had definitely dispersed the spell. Every spell follows the path of mana. Disrupt the mana, and the magic collapses. Henry had just proved it with his own hands. Terravan pulsed with raw energy, stronger than Henry expected. After all those sleepless nights training on the range, his effort was finally paying off. Now he could even slice through rank 3 spells. Morso burned with rage. A commoner dared to defy him. That was a sin in his world. And for Varian, this was a problem. If Morso lost, it'd be his career on the line too. The professor admitted Henry's defense was solid, but there had to be a limit to how many spells he could block in a row. Then came the question, what if the opponent just kept attacking? Morso took it as a cue to unleash hell. Stones rose from the ground, dozens of them, swirling like a storm of blades. The spectators went pale. If this kept up, Henry might actually get hurt. Why wasn't Varian stopping this? Morso believed this was the end. He summoned the piercing spires of Bemir, a deadly earth incantation meant to crush any defense. 11 massive rocks hurled toward Henry. If he couldn't blink away or slice through them all, his only chance was to block them head-on. And then, to everyone's shock, he did just that. Blocked the strongest spell in Morso's arsenal like it was nothing. Varian's fury boiled over. If Morso lost now, everything would fall apart. Henry had only copied a move he'd once seen in another game. Somehow, it worked. He called it stacking, a layered defense technique. But Terravan was burning through his focus fast. Holding that form demanded crazy mental strength, and the strain was killing his stamina. The defense was weaker than single-target blocking, and in a real fight, this move could be suicide. Thankfully, this was just a duel. The students whispered among themselves, with a defense like that, even Morso might lose. And if he did, the humiliation would eat him alive. Morso tried to cast again, but his turn was over. Varian didn't stop him, though. He wanted the fight to drag on. Morso snarled that he wasn't done yet, and told Henry to brace himself for more. But then Jeremy stepped forward. With that same infuriating grin, he casually questioned why Varian wasn't giving Henry a chance to strike back. The room went quiet. Students started whispering that Varian was pushing this too far, that Henry could really get hurt, that maybe this guy shouldn't even be a teacher. Varian had been so obsessed with the duel, he didn't notice the crowd turning against him. Finally, he handed the turn to Henry, One swift counter, and Henry shattered Morso's barrier, sending the noble crashing to the ground. The duel was over. Class S had just shown everyone what true power looked like. Jeremy wasn't impressed by Morso's failure. He made sure the guy paid for his recklessness. The punishment was brutal. Morso lay beaten, blood on the floor. Jeremy, wiping his hands clean, told Vera Jane to look after him. He didn't want anything to happen to his so-called friend. The girl nodded. Jeremy walked off, his tone calm but final. Today, he'd called Morso a friend, not a subordinate. In the Scalvan Empire, where heirs are chosen solely by magical power, Jeremy had claimed the title of Crown Prince at just 12, outshining all his brothers. For Morso to no longer be his subordinate meant the entire Dordan family was effectively erased from the Empire's political scene. But not just Morso. Even Henry, the so-called commoner who caught the prince's attention, had stepped onto a path with no way back. The class buzzed with gossip about Henry's so-called chivalry, his knightly ideals, his need to be seen. Yet no one could deny it. He'd beaten Morso Dordan, a noble from one of the Empire's oldest families. Everywhere Henry went, his name followed. And even though Flame never cared for attention, something about all this talk gnawed at her, a quiet irritation she couldn't explain. Professor Myzen Tyron's voice sliced through the chatter, sharp and commanding. She told everyone to lock in, because alchemy wasn't some playground magic. It was a craft of precision. One slip in your measurements, one wrong temperature, and the whole brew could blow up in your face. Today's mission was to master the Tyron Fatigue Relief Potion, her signature concoction. Flame already hated every second of it. Alchemy demanded a surgeon's patience, and her fiery temper wasn't built for that kind of restraint. One minor mistake, and the potion would be ruined. That's why she avoided this subject like a curse. Myzen scolded her for being sloppy and too independent, warning that potions could turn lethal if handled carelessly. Flame knew Myzen's fate. She'd fall into darkness someday, corrupted by her own obsession. The only way to prepare for that future was to keep showing up, acting like nothing was wrong. A low, sinister chuckle echoed from the next table. She turned and saw Henry, mixing something with unnerving focus and way too much excitement. At first, Flame figured he was only here to cozy up to Isel, but no, the guy looked completely unhinged. Eventually, she finished her assignment, 2 flawless potions gleaming on her desk like twin jewels. Quick, precise, and efficient, her performance stayed sharp, and that's what saved her. She glanced over at Isel and felt relief. The girl was fine, calm as ever. In the original story, Azel was supposed to stumble upon Mayenna's forbidden alchemy blueprints. That moment led her to brew something even more potent than Tyron's fatigue cure. But now, Flame couldn't understand why Azel was still working on a basic potion. Something felt off. Her thoughts shattered as Professor Myzen's furious yelling filled the room. Henry had swapped out ingredients on his own. His reasoning? It made the formula more effective. But Myzen snapped that it wasn't the Tyron fatigue relief potion she had ordered them to make. Somehow, Henry had brewed the same experimental formula Isel was supposed to invent later in the story. Reality itself was glitching. Myzen's tone turned venomous. She accused him of arrogance, of not listening, declaring that commoners like him simply didn't belong among true scholars. In the original timeline, her insult was much harsher, a cruel jab about a family in ruins. Those words had shattered Azel before, reopening the wound of being the daughter of traitors. She'd been broken until she finished her potion. But what if Henry knew that scene was coming and threw himself in the line of fire just to protect her? Myzen held serious power within Stella Academy. If you ever crossed her, your grades tanked across the board, even in other classes. Flame couldn't wrap her head around why Henry would risk himself for Isel. Meanwhile, Myzen kept yelling, furious at his tone, demanding to see his parents immediately. Henry, lost in his own focus, barely noticed. He muttered that he was an orphan and went back to work. Too late to turn back now. He was already knee-deep in trouble. His mind jumped ahead. Maybe tomorrow he'd try brewing kimchi potion or cola potion just for fun. Weeks passed, but the chaos stayed the same. Maisen's patience thinned every class as Henry kept tinkering with ingredients she hadn't even introduced yet. He argued that his version of her formulas always turned out stronger, smoother, more efficient. Then he slipped on his bulbul glasses, a relic that revealed corruption levels. Maisen's demonic influence registered at 21%. Her soul showed signs of inferiority and envy. Perfect. The plot was unfolding exactly as it should. By episode 8, Maisen Tyron would become a full-blown boss corrupted by a dark demon, consumed by jealousy and madness. Once that corruption hit 90%, she'd lose her humanity entirely. But until it passed 50%, no magic could detect the darkness inside her. Henry couldn't expose her yet. Without proof, she'd crush him instantly. The only option was to keep provoking her until the corruption peaked, then call in the Dark Demon Execution Squad. Normally, early-stage corruption could be reversed before full demonic transformation. But Maisen wasn't a victim. She was a contractor, someone who'd chosen darkness willingly. The demon seed had already bloomed inside her. There was no going back. And the main story hadn't even reached episode 4 yet, meaning Henry had encountered a boss-level threat way ahead of schedule. If he didn't act soon, Maisen would infect other students and drag the entire Stella Academy into ruin. Her scolding continued, warning him that he'd never see a decent grade in her class again. Perfect. The more she targeted him, the less attention fell on the others. What Henry didn't expect, though, was that the next practical exam would be a group project. One look at his teammates and he could tell they were mourning already. Trying to lighten the mood, he greeted them with a grin. His group included Azel, plus 2 guys, Michael and Jeff. Michael practically burst into tears, whining that their team was doomed. Maisen always failed anyone she didn't like, and now they had the Academy's #1 troublemaker on their squad. Azel cut him off, saying surrender wasn't an option. She reminded them that the practical exam would be graded by at least 3 alchemists from the Castle of Alchemy, meaning Maisen alone couldn't sink them. The mood flipped instantly. The boys' gloomy faces turned bright, and determination filled the room. Henry caught Azel's eye and smiled. She just looked away, brushing it off like it meant nothing. The assignment, a D-rank life force potion, wouldn't be that hard if they combined everything they'd learned so far. Still, they'd need top-tier ingredients to pull it off. Henry volunteered to secure the key component, a fire lizard's tail. Azel warned that ingredient quality mattered most. They'd have to find a fresh one, or the potion would fail. But Henry radiated confidence, and despite herself, Azel wanted to believe he could deliver. Meanwhile, the hero had a wild idea. Why hunt one when he could just order a fire lizard delivered straight to them? Somewhere else, Professor Maisen summoned a student to her desk. She handed them a stack of exam papers, instructing that every first-year group in Class C receive one, all except for Group 12. The practical alchemy exam was no ordinary test. It was overseen by certified masters from the legendary alchemy castle itself. If a student embarrassed themselves in front of them, their path as an alchemist would be sealed forever. Professor Maisen Tyron was determined to make an example out of Henry, to show what happens when a student dares to defy their teacher's authority. A messenger appeared at the training arena where Flame was practicing, carrying an official notice straight from Professor Maisen. The professor had instructed him not to tell any other students, and Flame instantly understood what that really meant. Maisen Tyron clearly intended to target only the 12th group, the one with Henry in it. She must have assumed Flame would just sit this one out. The announcement stated that the practical exams assignment had been changed. Instead of brewing the Vitality Elixir, students now had to craft Tyron's Guidance Elixir, a formula far more advanced and dangerous. Flame figured Henry, knowing the events of the original novel, would have already anticipated this twist and prepared a counterplan. He wouldn't go hunting for the fire lizard's tail, the main ingredient for the Vitality Elixir, but instead would search for italic spider scales, the crucial material for Tyrann's guidance elixir. This was Flame's chance to truly test the guy. Henry arrived at the massive Daravel arena. The teleportation portals were convenient, sure, but every time he used one, his head spun like crazy. A young woman greeted him respectfully, recognizing the insignia of Stella Academy. Henry corrected her, saying he wasn't a full-fledged mage yet, just a student. The woman assured him that any student from Stella deserved the same respect as an official mage. Passers-by stopped to stare, clearly impressed to see a Stella student in person. Many had never even seen their uniform before. The woman offered her help if he needed it. With the Academy's insignia on his wristwatch and his mage's pass, Henry realized he'd be treated as an official magic user anywhere he went. Studying at Stella definitely had its perks. Free portal travel alone, normally costing 100,000 credits, was already worth it. Thanks to that, Henry often ventured into the city on weekends, checking whether the information he'd gathered from the game world matched reality, and most of it did. His goal for today was clear: a fire lizard, a monster ranked at danger level 2. Its endurance and strength were far above local beasts, and taking it down required at least second-rank magic due to its high resistance and agility. Henry had fought monsters at level 1 before and handled them easily. He figured the next tier wouldn't be much harder. The fire lizards appeared at last, and Henry readied his blade. Trusting his sixth sense, he pinpointed the attack's direction and pierced through the creature's body in a single motion. But the bushes nearby rustled. More fire lizards lay in wait. It was time to gather ingredients while he could. Henry brought the fresh materials back to his group. The vibrant color and energy made it obvious they were top quality. Izel couldn't help but notice that his eye for ingredients was razor sharp. Now all that remained was to brew the potion flawlessly. Professor Meisen gathered everyone, confirming that the exam would be supervised by a commission of certified alchemists from the Alchemy Castle. Performing well here could open doors for the students' future careers as professional alchemists. Then she dropped the bomb. The new exam task was to brew Tyrann's guidance elixir, rank B. Every student was expected to have prepared the proper ingredients in advance. Izel and her team froze in shock. Their instructions had said to make the vitality elixir rank D. Professor Meisen coldly explained that she had already sent notifications to every student about the change. Looking around at the other team's tables, Izel noticed they'd all brought completely different materials. So this was how the professor planned to run the show. Henry didn't seem too bothered, but he knew it would be a disaster if his teammates failed because of this setup. He tried to remember if this event had ever happened in the original novel. Flame was confused. She thought Henry knew all the future storylines, so how had he walked right into this trap? Izel hesitated as she admitted that they had brought the wrong ingredients. Professor Meisen stated that they had violated the alchemist's primary code to seek truth through correct mixtures, and that no one could help the 12th group now. Henry rose to his feet and asked if the only task was to craft Tyrann's guidance elixir. He declared that his team would create an even better version of it using alternate ingredients, just as he'd always done before. Meisen smirked to herself. After all, the key component of the guidance elixir was the italic spider scale. Those scales were rich with nutrients, the perfect foundation for a magical catalyst. The Tyrran elixir required thermal processing with the spider scales as the base, but Henry planned to use the tail of a fire lizard as the core reagent instead. A bold, unconventional move. That suited Professor Meisen just fine. She'd destroy his reputation in the alchemy world right there in front of everyone. She gave the official order, 1 hour to complete the task. Henry's teammates thought he'd completely lost it. They weren't even sure their materials were compatible. Still, Henry stayed calm. With no other option left, he told them to trust him and give it their all. Michael and Jeff agreed. It was better to try than to be disqualified without a fight. Fired up, the team prepared to prove themselves, and Henry began laying out his plan. Alchemy had been one of his favorite mechanics back in the game, so he'd memorized and logged every single recipe, even the basic ones. Among them was the exact formula for Tyrann's guidance elixir, Rank B. He hadn't planned to recreate it here, since Maizen herself would eventually invent it in the future, but the situation demanded otherwise. Henry explained to his teammates that italic spider scales contained enough nutrients to sustain the creature's egg incubation. That property made them similar to the fire lizard's tail. He pointed to a blood vessel along the sample, noting that southern desert tribes, like the Alikar, consumed it to fortify their bodies and extend their vitality. Some say that whoever drinks from this vessel extends their lifespan, a relic of old-world myth turned half-science. Guess it's worth a shot to test the legend in action. Michael claimed he knew a bit about the Alikar tribe's crafting rituals and stepped up, volunteering to take charge of that part. His confidence had that quiet, desert warrior vibe. Henry explained that the mistletoe of the mulberry tree had to be dried using the desert-style mana-release technique. Jeff had picked up that old-school manual method while traveling with his father through Forgotten Sands. It would only take him 5 minutes to dry the blood vessels. Izel would handle the next step, the delicate fusion that tied the entire process together. These kids were sharper than Henry expected. Now all that was left was to merge their work into one, just like he'd taught them. Professor Maizen was floored when Group 12 presented their Tyran Guidance Elixir. Her eyes went wide, disbelief mixed with the faint sting of pride. The other judges couldn't believe what they were seeing either. Kids pulling off a masterpiece like this? Unreal. Maizen refused to accept it. She had spent years perfecting that formula. No way a bunch of students had replicated it on their first try. One of the women on the panel stepped forward, saying she'd evaluated herself. Her verdict was calm. The process wasn't perfectly finished, maybe a few too many ingredients. But still, the result spoke for itself. Even so, this elixir outclassed Professor Maizen's own creation. Incredible. The new generation really was something else, picking up tricks that would take decades to learn. Professor Maizen snapped, demanding the potion to verify it herself. The moment she held it, she felt it. Her own technique, her method of sustaining human life through monster nutrients, refined beyond recognition. This was without a doubt a completed Tyran Guidance Elixir. Maizen's mind reeled. How could these brats surpass her own work so effortlessly? But she still held the power of grading. She could disqualify them on a whim, citing improper ingredients if she wanted. Yet before she could speak, the other judges interrupted, declaring that even an A+ wasn't high enough to measure this achievement. Rage burned in Maizen's chest, but she couldn't argue with the senior panel. Not today. Through gritted teeth, she announced that Group 12 had passed. Still, she swore Henry would pay. Deep within her, the influence of the dark demon grew stronger. After class, the squad hit the training grounds for some drills. Flame felt relief flooding her body. Finally, they were done. Every muscle ached. Maybe she was getting too old for this school grind. She overheard her friends cheering on Arshuan, saying she still outperformed the princess. Flame had heard of the princess, a prodigy among fire mages. But Arshuan was anxious. Monica was improving at lightning speed, while she'd spent years mastering her craft. Soon, the princess might outshine her completely. Flame knew Monica's fire control was supposed to evolve during her second year, yet she was already blooming ahead of schedule. Maybe Henry's hand was in this too. Even the alchemy exam had gone off script. Izel wasn't supposed to develop the B-rank Tyran Guidance Elixir formula yet. That was Maizen's future theft, according to the novel's timeline. Somehow, Henry knew a recipe that wasn't even mentioned in the original story. And he acted like he didn't even expect that incident to happen. Wait, he knew things from the future, but didn't seem familiar with the novel's actual plotline. Flame realized, maybe he didn't transmigrate like her. Maybe he regressed. It made perfect sense. If he'd come back from the future, he'd remember key events, not the tiny side stories Izel got tangled in. In the novel, Mitch once gained the power to return to the past. That gift came from the one being with dominion over time, the 11th moon of the Silver Era. Liam approached Flame, curious what had her so deep in thought. Without hesitation, she asked what he thought of Henry. Liam didn't get her angle, but said Henry just seemed weird, that's all. Flame pressed, asking if he noticed anything else unusual. Liam hadn't. Then, out of nowhere, he asked if she was into the guy. She hesitated, then admitted she kind of was. To her, Henry seemed to know things from the original novel, just like she did. But then Flame straightened up. Standing still wasn't her style. If she was here, she'd face him head on. Open her heart to Henry, not in a romantic sense, but to share her truth. Liam misunderstood completely, stunned that she planned to bare her heart to the hero. 12:39. The next day, Henry sat in the cafeteria, lost in thought. What came next? The Dark Demon's corruption over Maizen Tyran had reached 37%. That meant the next major incident would strike within 3 months. The demon's influence spread unpredictably, always latching onto a student. This time, there were 3 potential targets. Flame's friend Jackie, Monica's support mage Arshuan, and Liam, heir to the Tower of the Full Moon. The worst-case scenario would be if it infected him. In the game, that outcome was nearly impossible. But if the Dark Demon tainted the Moon Tower's air in reality, it would trigger the route to the bad ending. Leaving the cafeteria, Henry pondered who the next victim might be, until he bumped straight into Flame. She reminded him that he'd never really answered her question about who he truly was. There she went again. Flame always had to make things more complicated. Still, telling her the truth, and maybe learning something from her in return, could bring him closer to the true ending. He had nothing left to lose. But then, system warnings flared around him like red sigils, forbidding him from revealing the reincarnation or giving info to a key protagonist. His mind spun. Fine, time for a cover story. Henry told Flame that they both had secrets they'd rather not share, so maybe they should just keep things on the surface for now. Luckily, the storm passed, and Flame agreed to drop it. She opened with a bomb, asking if Henry knew the future. The guy had said they'd keep things on the surface, but she went straight for the endgame. If she was asking that, it meant she knew something too. So Henry countered, wanting to know what she was really chasing by studying at this academy. Her answer hit heavy. She wanted to prevent the collapse of this fragile, dying world. That sounded good enough, though Henry couldn't tell if she was being real or bluffing. Then Flame asked why he acted the way he did, calm but detached, like someone walking through a storm without getting wet. Henry went vague on purpose, saying it was simply better for everyone that way. That should have shut things down, but Flame wasn't buying it. She demanded honesty. Nobody could be that selfless. She was sure Henry had an agenda, that there had to be something in it for him. But he swore there wasn't. Truth was, he didn't even know what he really wanted anymore. And then he said it. He just wanted to survive. That hit Flame right in the heart. She apologized, realizing she'd pushed too far. Tears welled up, and she ran off. Shame. It was supposed to be Henry's turn to ask questions. Before he could even process what happened, Liam appeared with an intimidating glare, demanding to know why Flame left crying. The guy's tone was icy, promising that if Henry lied, there'd be no peace between them. It was wild. The rival of the strongest student in the academy, glaring like a beast ready to pounce. Henry had completely forgotten that Liam secretly carried a torch for Flame. One wrong word, and things could explode, so honesty was the only option. He explained that nothing had happened between him and Flame. Liam didn't look convinced. Henry doubled down, clarifying that there was nothing romantic or hidden going on. That seemed to ease the tension a little. Liam went quiet for a moment before muttering an apology for his pointless question. Then he turned around and left without another word. Strange. In the original story, Liam was nothing like this. The calm, composed serpent of the Moon Tower was acting erratic. Henry couldn't shake off the unease creeping in. Meanwhile, Izel tried to focus on her studies, but her thoughts kept spiraling. After the alchemy class, she'd approached Henry to ask about his mixing method. She wanted to know if he had come up with it on the fly, and he'd casually said, "Yeah, pretty much." Izel had always seen herself as a genius, convinced that hard work would one day let her surpass her professors. She truly believed that. But now, after witnessing that display, she questioned everything. How could she catch up at this rate? Especially when she still carried the rage, the need to avenge her father, framed as a traitor and executed by those vile Adalabit scum. She couldn't just let it go. She had to push harder. She would push harder. Flame lived in a shared dorm with 3 others because she loved the buzz of daily life. But if she'd known how chaotic it would be, she'd have chosen a solo S-class room without hesitation. Henry had told her plainly that he had no clear goal. That pretty much confirmed it. He was a regressor. In the final act of the original novel, the 11th moon of the Silver Era offered Mitch a chance to reverse time, at the cost of most of his memories. When his mission ended, his very existence would be erased. No one would remember him. Not even the people he loved. The moon asked him if he was truly willing to walk that path again. Mitch had agreed, if that was his fate. But Izel stopped him. She said she'd rather die remembering him than live in a world without him. So they chose to face the end together. Her words changed everything. Mitch abandoned the regression, and the world perished in the epilogue. Flame thought about it. If this world really was diverging from the novel's script, and Henry had used the 11th moon's power to regress, then once his mission was done, he'd vanish. Every trace of him wiped clean. Yet the one who should have lost his memories, the man who should live only for his mission, had said he just wanted to survive. Suddenly, Jackie burst into the room yelling that Liam was downstairs looking for Flame. He was waiting in the dorm lobby, but Flame told her to say she wasn't there. Jackie tried to convince her otherwise, but Flame's refusal was firm. So Jackie went down and met Liam herself, though he didn't even recognize who she was. He only wanted to know where Flame was. Jackie said she wasn't feeling well and had gone to bed early. Liam was surprised, all this just because of some third-rate student's rejection. He sighed and walked away. Jackie's chest tightened. She loved Liam deeply, yet he couldn't even remember her name. It had always been like that. The attention, the admiration, the brilliance, everything always went to Flame, even Liam's heart. Jackie clenched her fist, fury burning behind her calm face. She was so damn tired of this. Meanwhile, in the first tower, Professor Misen was being chewed out, humiliated by a mere student and left with no excuses to offer. The Academy's vice director, Akihaden, reminded her sharply that the expectations placed on her were immense, and failure was not an option. Akihaden asked how the research on the convergence method of random sequences was going, the one Professor Misen had been running with the Moonshadow Order's scholars. She said she wouldn't let him down. He placed a lot of faith in her. Too much, maybe. As soon as Misen left his office, Akihaden muttered that she was a fool. She had no clue she was just a pawn. The glory had blinded Misen Tyron completely. It was almost comical. A so-called warrior of humanity working side by side with demonic researchers. Akihaden could barely contain his excitement for the day when magical alchemy and engineering would finally be perfected. Meanwhile, Henry helped Altellus carry a mountain of heavy papers through the chaos of the lab. She thanked him. Without his help, Misen would have probably chewed her out again. The professor's office was a full-blown disaster zone. Papers everywhere, pure chaos. Then Henry's eyes caught a formula that looked oddly familiar. Altellus said Misen had been developing it with some doctors from the Order. They called it the convergence method of random sequences. Henry knew it well. That formula would become the foundation of magical alchemy and engineering. In the original timeline, the demons helped Misen finish it, but the difference in their methods led to catastrophic results. But now, with Altellus in the picture, things could play out differently. If she managed to solve the issue before the demonic faction entered the scene, the whole story could shift. Henry turned to the assistant. She thought he was about to ask for coffee. Instead, he asked if she wasn't tired of being bossed around by Misen all the time. Altellus was surprised. She didn't expect that question. Henry hinted that he might have a simple way for her to get back at her boss. She laughed it off, saying she was just an assistant. If she got fired, she'd end up on the streets. Henry told her there was another way: become a better alchemist than Maizen. That way, no one could ever push her around again. Altellus smiled weakly. That sounded nice. She was exhausted from being treated like dirt. No one could genuinely enjoy the dirty, dusty storage work Maizen dumped on her every day. She dreamed of becoming a real alchemist, inventing new things, and had the talent to actually make it happen. One day, she'd become the brightest alchemist of her generation and flood the world with innovation. Reality had held her back until now, forcing that dream into the shadows. But Henry planned to change that. When exam week ended at Stella, Henry visited her regularly. She told him she'd been thinking of adding a color switch function to her pen. Henry suggested she could also attach an eraser, like a mechanical pencil. Altellus's inventions were taking shape fast, but her formula calculations still needed work. Henry had to subtly guide the young genius to the right path before Maizen found her. Easier said than done. Flame caught him zoning out again and teased that he'd crash into something if he kept daydreaming. Henry blinked. Old man? Clearly she meant him. She was hanging around him more and more lately. Good timing, though. Henry asked if she remembered her friend Jackie. Flame instantly jumped to conclusions before Henry even explained. He just told her to keep an eye on Jackie. Jackie's been acting off lately. If she's under the influence of a dark demon, things could get ugly. Flame didn't get it completely, but she planned to go hunting with Jackie that weekend. She could watch her there. Henry knew exactly where they'd end up. The Martavis graveyard. That's where the fourth major episode begins. All the key players, Mitch, Azel, and Flame, would be there. The battle would be massive, featuring a rank 5 necromancer. The professor reminded him that fencing and honor codes weren't exactly top priorities at Stella. On Hillman's desk, Henry noticed Mitch's leave request. Better look into that. He mentioned how so many students were taking time off to go hunting. Hillman said most of them were probably heading to the Martavis graveyard to earn points. Just as Henry suspected, Mitch and Liam already had sky-high scores, yet they were still grinding. But Hillman added that Mitch was heading home. Liam, meanwhile, was teaming up with Flame. That was bad. Without Mitch, they'd stand no chance against a rank 5 necromancer. Henry couldn't figure out what was going on with Mitch. The guy wouldn't skip a mission without a damn good reason. Still, the team was doomed without him. Henry was stuck. Without solid proof, he couldn't request reinforcements, and narrative law prevented him from just spilling the truth. But he couldn't just let them die either. There was only one path left: handle it himself. A few days later, students were already swarming the Martavis graveyard for the hunt. Second-year Gibi laughed, boasting that even mid-tier monsters couldn't handle a single hit from him. Another student, Kasif Derek, yelled at him for destroying everything in sight and ignoring orders. Ban Dien, another second year, told Izel not to bother arguing. It was like talking to a wall. Ban Dien told everyone to chill and not stress over those loudmouths. The guys warned each other to watch their words in front of the rookie. Izel had joined their squad, mostly because the club had an open slot. Plus, their rules allowed special field leave. At first, she'd been cautious, but these people didn't seem bad at all. For the first time in a while, her chest felt lighter. Dien called for her to move out, but then a strange noise echoed through the misty graveyard. Somewhere nearby, someone was fighting, hard. The sound of magic and steel clashing filled the air. Their hunting zones might have overlapped, and that could turn ugly fast. Dien decided it'd be smarter to check who it was and say hi before things escalated. As they got closer, Azel recognized the fighters, Monica and Flame. Monica claimed she'd tagged that shimmering prey first, but Flame argued it was her team's hunting zone. The prize, a massive prophetic fish, was worth serious academy points. The creature carried a level 3 hazard rank. a rare find by any standard. Izel could tell they were fighting over who'd score more credits. If her squad jumped in, it'd blow up into a full-scale mess. Besides, she had zero desire to cross paths with the little sister of the man who had murdered her father. Izel tried to leave quietly, but Derek suggested the girls cool off and explain things to their seniors. Monica snapped at him to shut his mouth and get lost. The guy bristled, offended that she'd talk to an upperclassman like that. The princess just smirked and told him to start acting like one. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A deep rumble rolled through the graveyard as something beneath began to stir. From the cracked earth, a horde of skeletons erupted, their hollow eyes burning with ghost light. Meanwhile, Henry was on the other side of the graveyard, grinding his skill XP like a pro. He missed the rush of spellcasting. All he had left was a weak flicker spell. He knew he'd soon run into someone significant. The air around him shifted. He had reached that spot. Henry didn't have the busted skills or absurd firepower that Mitch possessed. Taking out a skeleton army solo wasn't an option. So there was only one way left to survive: fight like a true player. The fourth arc had officially begun, the Necromancer's assault. From the ground rose a skeletal general, its aura commanding hundreds of undead soldiers. This episode featured 3 such generals, mid-tier bosses that could wipe out an unprepared squad in seconds. With Henry's current build, fighting head-on meant instant death, but Henry never fought fair. He dove straight in, striking the general again and again, forcing it back into the dirt. Watching a monster transform or chant its summoning incantation was pure cinematic cliché. Henry had no time for that. Every second wasted meant death. Soon, the general's spine staff was in his hands, a trophy and a key. With it, command over the skeletal horde now bent to his will. It was time to move. Flame suddenly froze. She'd completely forgotten this was that necromancer arc. But something felt off. From what she remembered, Mitch was supposed to be leading this raid. So why were Izel and these randoms here? And where the hell was Mitch? The thought hit her like ice. These rookies were facing a rank 5 necromancer. With this squad, that was suicide. Liam sent a signal through his academy watch, calling for backup from Stella. They just had to hold out against the skeletons until help arrived. The professors would respond soon. He was sure of it. Even if they couldn't beat the necromancer, they could at least survive. Monica shouted over the chaos that talking wouldn't help. This was a graveyard. The longer they stalled, the more skeletons would spawn. They needed to fall back to camp now. A skeleton lunged for Jackie, its claws inches from her face. But Izel's blade flashed, cutting it down just in time. The girl was trembling, terrified, but alive. Gabi muttered that the rookie had guts. This necromancer wasn't playing around. Izel thought there was a strong chance he was using the Vessel of Souls technique. That technique let a necromancer anchor and recycle their mana flow. Normally, they had a strict mana cap. Summoning a dozen rank 3 or rank 4 skeletons would normally drain them dry. But this one had claimed a massive area and kept expanding it. More and more undead were swarming in. Gabi realized this must have been planned ages ago. A full-scale ambush. Were they trying to wipe the team out and raise them as skeletal magi? The thought sent a chill down everyone's spine. Kasif, the field leader, decided to show them what a real upperclassman could do. He began charging a high-tier spell, determined to end the fight in one strike. But before he could finish, one of the skeletons grabbed his leg, disrupting the incantation. Gabi dashed in, kicking the monster away, but the spell's flow was already breaking apart. Mana backlash surged violently. Gabi yelled for everyone to get down. If it detonated, the explosion would level the whole team. Skeletons kept flooding in, more than they could possibly handle. Flame's mana reserves were running on fumes. She couldn't cast another spell. Everyone was exhausted, cornered, and out of options. Another skeleton lunged straight at Flame. She thought that was it, that her story would end right here. But then everything froze. The undead stopped moving all at once. Behind them stood a shadowed figure, Henry, holding the decapitated skull of the skeletal general. Flame knew exactly what that meant. Generals were way stronger than regular skeletons, guarded by elite lieutenants. The idea that Henry had soloed one was almost unthinkable, but the proof was right there in his hands. Whatever the case, the horde was neutralized, and Flame was safe. When the others finally came to their senses, they surrounded Henry, voices trembling with gratitude. He'd saved them all. Yet Azel couldn't shake her curiosity about how Henry had ended up holding a skeletal general's head, like some kind of cursed trophy. He brushed it off, saying he'd just fished it out from a pile of bones. The truth, that he'd been waiting, stalking the spawn point like a pro gamer, wasn't something the squad needed to know. There was no time to waste. They needed a plan. Fast. Once the necromancer realized his generals were toast, he'd start controlling the skeletons directly, and that would turn the battlefield into hell. On the way here, Henry had noticed the necromancer's base was set up dangerously close to their main camp. Escape routes were already sealed. That left one insane option: take out the boss! Everyone froze at the thought. They'd studied enough in class to know necromancers had devastating magic power but weak physical stats. The problem was the wall of protection around him. Henry warned that the enemy had already summoned a full army, and if they didn't strike now, they'd never get another chance to run. At the moment, the necromancer's defense force consisted of 1 general, 6 elite skeletons, and about 50 regular soldiers. The longer they hesitated, the more enemies would spawn. This was their only shot, but convincing everyone was another matter. Then Flame stepped forward, fire in her eyes, declaring they could win. Henry might look like a scatterbrained fool, but the dude had combat instincts. Monica backed him up too. There was no other way out of the trap. Besides, no necromancer in their right mind would expect a counterattack from students. Gaby and Diane didn't share the same blind confidence, but they both knew survival alone wasn't possible. So they stood shoulder to shoulder with the others. Diane spoke with grim resolve. They had to try everything before the necromancer figured out what was happening. In the dark heart of the battlefield, the 5th-rank necromancer, William of the Tower of Shadows, laughed to himself. He thought fate had finally smiled upon him. These young chicks from Stella Academy were perfect for his plans. Once he turned them into skeletal mages, even those arrogant scum from the Dark Demon Alliance would have to respect him. William had spent 7 years gathering mana into his vessel of souls, and 700 corpses were his army at rest. He swore that no one would ever mock him again. But then, his connection snapped. His general was gone. That was when the heroes made their move. A crack split the bone wall William had crafted with 4th-rank dark magic. He roared that none of them would leave alive, but an explosion of fire caught him mid-chant, scorching his robes. The necromancer faltered, blindsided. He never expected these children to attack first. Weak or not, they were still Stella students. Reluctantly, William resorted to his forbidden technique. Cutting his own finger, he began the blood ritual to summon elite undead warriors. He went too far. The backlash tore at his insides. But it was enough. He ordered his skeletal elites to crush the intruders. Just as he thought the situation was under control, a shadow loomed beside him. Henry was already there. The necromancer had been monitoring the students through the eyes of his minions. Yet this one had somehow slipped through his vision. In Henry's hands gleamed the shattered skull of the fallen general. He threw it to the ground and crushed it underfoot. William coughed blood, his magical bond rupturing. The pain spread through him like fire. He had underestimated the true strength of Stella Academy. Things were spiraling fast. Gaby and Bon Diane were supposed to finish off the other generals and reinforce Henry, but the extra elites delayed them. It looked like Henry would have to face the necromancer alone, the weakest of them all, standing against the strongest. For a moment, he thought about retreating. But then he saw the necromancer's trembling hands. The man wasn't in great shape either. William had overexerted himself with the summons, his body breaking from within. Henry realized there was still a chance. Monica's situation was dire. She needed to finish her fight and back Henry up fast. Jackie shouted a warning. The hero was one-on-one with the necromancer now, a first-rank mage versus a fifth-rank necromancer. It wasn't even a contest. If Henry died, Monica swore she'd drag him out of the grave just to kill him again. William tried to trap him in a bone cage, but Henry darted out before it could close. He had predicted the necromancer would throw up a bone wall for defense. That's why he'd brought a stash of cola-based alchemy potions, perfect for melting bone structures. The barrier crumbled under the fizzy reaction. William retaliated with bone spears, and Henry knew this was his moment. Attack while the enemy's casting. But the necromancer wasn't dumb. One of the spears pierced Henry's leg clean through. William smirked inwardly, admiring how battered the kid looked. Even weakened, a fifth rank was still a fifth rank. Yet, surprisingly, that rank didn't mean much anymore. The great necromancer was fading. William's mana reserves were almost gone. One more push and Henry could finish this. But fighting through pain was brutal. His concentration wavered. He could barely activate his flicker interrupt spell. Henry waited for William to strike. Then he lunged forward, crawling through blood and dust. The necromancer laughed at his pathetic attempt to flee. Henry gritted his teeth, dragging himself a few feet closer through the agony. William declared it was over. That resistance was pointless. But Henry already knew. Victory was his. The distance between them was 13 meters. Close enough. That meant he didn't need flicker interrupt at all. He closed in silently, catching the necromancer completely off guard. His blade plunged straight into William's chest, piercing through bone and heart alike. Across the battlefield, the skeletons crumbled into dust. The others instantly realized what had happened. Henry had slain the necromancer. The nightmare was over. Everyone was alive. The hero, however, could barely stand, utterly drained, longing for nothing but a soft bed. Later, Stella's magical knights arrived and escorted the exhausted students back to the academy, their victory echoing like a legend in the night. Henry told Mr. Hillman he'd be training up in the mountains, fresh air and all, but somehow ended up surrounded by gravestones instead. Not exactly the kind of air he had in mind. He apologized, but the academy's rules were the academy's rules. No matter how heroic he'd been, he was still getting points deducted. No exceptions. Still, Hillman admitted that Henry's decision to rush off and save his teammates without hesitation, breaking school rules in the process, was something worth respect. The guy would get his proper reward and some well-earned merit points soon enough. After that, the professor left. The nurse told Henry it'd take a few days for his legs to heal, so he'd better rest up. He was about to leave when Izel approached to thank him for what happened. Henry grinned and told her she could repay him later, with dinner. She fell silent, and Henry figured it was time to retreat to the dorms before things got awkward. But then, Azel suddenly asked if she could ever reach his level, if she tried hard enough. That threw him off. In the original story, she never asked questions like that. Guess his interference had already started changing her fate. Izel had faced trials before, but she never got the chance to overcome them. Henry told her there was no point in asking him that. She'd already achieved results that most people considered impossible. She asked how he could know that. Simple. Because he'd been watching. In that moment, Henry realized how that sounded. Great. Now he felt like a total stalker. He decided it was best to leave quickly before anyone started labeling him a creep. But to Azel, those words meant everything. No one cared about the daughter of a traitor. Yet this guy said he'd been watching her progress. The phrase, "amazing results," warmed her heart more than she expected. Later, the entire academy gathered in the courtyard. Henry could hardly believe that nobles, professors from the magic faculty, and even the tower's mages had all shown up for a simple award ceremony. The whole thing felt ridiculously grandiose. But hey, Monica was glowing like she'd just won the championship. Mr. Hillman took the stage and called for silence. Today, 12 brave students who'd fought against the dark demonic cult would receive honors. And those honors were to be presented by none other than the headmaster himself, the strongest of all humans, Archmage of the 9th rank, Eltman Eltwin, 300 years old, wearing his usual serene smile. Behind that calm look was the most powerful mage alive, bearing the fearsome title, the Exterminator. The headmaster gave Gabi a pat on the shoulder, praising their efforts and urging them to keep working hard. Then he stepped up to Henry. Just one glance from him carried insane pressure. So this was what a 9th rank mage felt like, one of only 10 in the entire world. Still, Henry refused to avert his eyes. Eltman smiled wider, saying Henry was just as diligent here as ever, exactly what the headmaster had hoped for. With that, the ceremony ended, leaving Henry deep in thought about what those words might have meant. As his official reward, Henry received 5 million credits, enough to not worry about money for a while. He also got a soul vessel, basically a necromancer's heart. It'd be tricky to use for now, but once Altalesia finished developing her subspace system, storing stuff like this would be a breeze. Though first, she'd need to solve the random sequence convergence issue. Either way, it was cool that the other students decided to give their rewards to Henry. Now came the system's own rewards. Since Henry had continued the story in a unique way, the system offered him a special bonus. He could pick between a weakened in-game artifact, a downgraded skill from the game, or extra experience. Tough call, but Henry chose to convert the experience into his Flicker-Auburn skill. Right now, that was the most crucial thing. He'd realized just how weak he still was in battle. Working hard like everyone else wouldn't cut it. He had to use his knowledge to push way further. The Flicker skill hit its experience cap and ranked up. He could now use Flicker 3 times in a row without burning out. Finally, a real upgrade. Next up, Azel's turn. Her current class was Meditation, Journey into the Abyss. A voice echoed in her mind, warning that magic was forbidden during meditation. She looked up and saw several floating ice blocks. She couldn't even remember casting them. No chants, no formulas, nothing. It seemed no one else noticed. Even though it was only first-rank magic, they should have at least felt the mana flow before it formed. If this really was a result of meditation, then that guy, Henry, had somehow foreseen it. Class ended. With her new reward money, Azel could finally afford a red bean bun for 1,500 credits, and honestly, she was thrilled. Her snack time got interrupted when Jeremy walked up, asking if she'd joined any clubs yet. She said not yet. He immediately offered her a spot in his. Azel asked what the conditions were. Jeremy said he just liked her and wanted her in his group. Lies. The guy was totally trying to score points and make her his next trophy. Azel saw right through it. He insisted there were no strings attached. She just needed to join and stay close to him. He'd take care of her. After all, she knew who he was. Of course she did. Prince Jeremy of the Scalvan Empire, the guy whose country was constantly butting heads with a Dalabit kingdom. Being under his protection would completely change her life. No more being the trader's daughter. No more surviving off cheap pastries. Deep down, Azel knew she shouldn't, but she was ready to say yes. Suddenly, Flame stormed over and slapped her across the face. She yelled at Azel, furious that she'd thought they'd face everything together, only for Azel to secretly flirt with guys instead. Flame confessed her feelings, and now Azel was just abandoning her? Azel was too stunned to process what was happening. Flame grabbed her hand and dragged her away to talk. Once they were gone, the main heroine let out a sigh of relief. Whatever Azel was thinking, she still owed Flame a thank you.